All right, indeed, it is indeed time for the Fluffle to assemble. Welcome, one and all, to the Rabid Atheist Show. I'm your host, Ed Raby, a former pastor turned atheist, now compassionate anti-theist. Welcome to my channel. Welcome to another Friday night where we do some reacting to various theist, non-theist preachers. And today we have the ever wonderful inspired philosophy, Mike Jones, and we're going to continue looking at some of his videos in his series, Are the Gospels Reliable?, which he turned into a big video. I've been working on reacting to that chapter by chapter, but I'm also looking at some of the shorter videos that went into that. So there we go. There we go. So let's see. But before we get into that, there is, of course, a goal in chat. Help keep my stream and my channel going. The support, if we get to that certain goal of 5, then I will wear whatever hat has been chosen by the poll. And on Friday, the Holy Bunny hat is in place. So you can actually get some Fangs lore maybe out of this. So there you go. So there you go. There's also a link to the Discord link in the description. If you want to join the Fluffle of Fangs, you're more than welcome. Everybody's welcome in the Fluffle. It's very nice, warm, and cozy there, I believe. Before we get into things, let's see who's here. Boy, there's a lot of people here tonight. Some was here early. Good to see you, some. Glad your phone's working. Yeah, Fangs healed your phone. We'll take credit for that. I mean, if any other god can take credit for it, we'll make Fangs do it. He fixed it. Yeah, I do Fridays. I know, Rimmer, you haven't been around quite a bit, and we already talked about it, but yep, Monday through Friday. Got to scroll down. You guys had a long conversation. Elizabeth is here. Good to see you, Elizabeth. The elder gods have sent their representative. Allegedly, Fred is here, allegedly. Keep scrolling. And there she is. The beautiful, lovely, wonderful, smart, intelligent lap in which our Lord naps. I killed Earl, one of the smartest women I know. Dragon Rider is here. Michael's here. Martin, good to see you, Martin. There's Party Wolf Media. Hey, Wolf. Ryan is here. Now, you are actually here. Okay, there we go. There we go. I just want to make sure. Allegedly, Fred is allegedly here. So, yeah, you gotta keep that hidden, Wolf. You gotta keep that hidden. All right, a little preliminaries before I get into the reaction. Some of the things I'm doing right now go along with what IP is doing. He, after all, issued a challenge that Apologia took up in a 2-hour video. If you bother to listen to both his 6-hour, IP's 6-hour thing, and then Paul's 2.5-hour response, you know that Michael was kind of like, no atheist has taken up this challenge, and now Paul has. And the latest report I got from that was IP had a meltdown about it. He basically said, just, this is bad. This is just really bad. And never bothered to, I don't think he's still bothered to give an explanation of what he thinks is so bad. Maybe he's done a reaction to it. Yeah. So, but what I'm doing is, okay, I'll take up that challenge. And I had the Fluffle vote on it. It was like 61%. But you know what? Far be it from me not to give you what you want. So I'm going to be reacting to this in a video series, but I also want to do a few live reactions on some of the smaller videos. And this one is like 5th or 6th. It's the 5th or 6th chapter, because basically what he did is he did like a bunch of videos and slapped them together for the longer one. But yeah, so, but yeah. Yeah. So we're gonna deep dive this a little bit, this 6th video. And this one is about the dating of the Gospels. When are the Gospels dated? Of course, conservatives want the dating to be very early towards the events, because then there's less gap of time for shenanigans and things like that. So we'll see. So there you go. Did he gallop the Council of Poor Apologetics? Yeah, probably. But yes, I know that he had I don't know if he's reacted to Apologia yet. He usually does that. So yeah, tore him to shred courteously, but effective. That's really bad. Yeah, that's pretty much what I saw so far. So we'll see. Hey, there you go. Hey, Native, good to see you. There you go. All right. So let's pull this up here.
Most scholars date the gospel.
All right. Don't start on me yet, Mike. Not ready for you yet. I got to brace myself properly. Here we go. All right. But here, Mike Jones is going to explain to us why the gospel dating should be earlier. He's going to make a breakdown of the dating as it currently stands too. So we'll talk about that when we get there. So there we go. But this is his video titled, when were the Gospels written, something to that effect. So the Gospels are written early, and that's his claim. And we're gonna see if he lives up and proves that or something else. Here, one day to be younger. Totally. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Wrong way, Ryan.
Most scholars date the Gospels to after 70 AD, meaning they would have been written after the destruction of the Jewish temple. This means they were likely written when many of the eyewitnesses had passed away due to persecution or age. But is this accurate? Dating the Synoptic Gospels after 70 AD is based on questionable assumptions, and there is actually quite a lot of good evidence to date them prior to 64 AD, when most of the disciples and eyewitnesses were still alive and preaching.
Okay, that's his claim. Okay, so the claim is like the current dating of the Gospels puts them 70 AD-ish and backwards from that. And what IP is claiming is like, no, there's a lot of assumptions behind that dating method, which we're going to discuss as how much assumption there actually is. And then he says there's good evidence that they should be dated earlier. So that's his claim. Let's see if he bothers to prove it. Let's find out tonight whether he's going to bodily prove it. So, no, it's Rimmer. He sounds like an AI. Have you ever listened to IP? You ever listened to Mike? He could be an AI voice. Like he, yeah, it really is that flat. I'm not. It really is. So yes, Mike Jones does indeed sound like this. So, so there you go. Why the Gospels are early. Here we go.
The standard view today is Mark was written around 70 AD, Matthew and Luke were written around 85 to 90 AD, and John was written last around 90 to 95 AD. For the purposes of this video, we do not plan to contest the dates for John. Church tradition is that John lived into his old age and composed his gospel close to his death. But what about the synoptics? The main argument.
Okay, so he's already conceding the point on John, that John's probably about 90 AD, because that's also when even most conservative Christian scholars put it. So there's not a lot of argument about the dating of John, other than a few people that want to put it maybe later. But there's not, most scholars put John at about 90, 95 AD. So he's just basically conceding that point at this point, and it's probably a smart move. The real issue is indeed when are the synoptics dated? Like, when did that all happen? And so that's kind of, yeah, I'll define early. So there we go. So there's that. Yeah. So, but there you go. His voice really is that flat. Yes, it really is. It was one of the things I had to get used to when I first started listening to him. Probably 5 years ago. That his voice is really like that. That it really is. It's unique. I'll give him that. So.
Argument for dating Mark to around 70 AD. is that Jesus seems to speak of the coming destruction of the temple and Christian persecution.
He, just as a warning, he all throughout this video, he does this thing where he throws up quotes and stuff on the thing. And so he's going to talk about the destruction of the temple in relationship to the dating of Mark and why he thinks it's wrong. Okay, so we're going to get into that part right away. So, oh yeah, definitely. Good to see you, Vixen. But yeah, he does this a lot throughout the video. If I feel it's important to stop and read it, I will. But most of the time, it's just him throwing up quotes and stuff. And I have to make a note about quotes because after Apologia released his video, I was watching Kip Davis, and he was over there as well. He popped up in the comments, and Kip was remarking about how Mike Jones tends to quote books in certain places, not realizing that in other places the very point he's making is also refuted. Like they call it like a Trojan source, like the source that I thinks he's using that helps him also diminishes his case as well at times. So just be aware of that as we go through. So yeah, 80 years without media is a massive amount of time. Yes, it is. So it's a lot of time, especially when you don't have like recording methods like we do today. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff that can happen.
These things took place between 64 and 70 AD. So Mark must have been written after or during this time. Matthew and Luke used Mark as a source, so they must have been written after. Fame Perkins says, references to war in Judea, as well as to persecution, suggest that it was written during Nero's persecution of Christians in Rome or the Jewish revolt in Judea. Independently of each other, Matthew and Luke expanded Mark. Barterman agrees and says, it is frequently noted that the earliest Gospels seem to presuppose the destruction of the city of Jerusalem and of the Jewish temple, as happened in 70 CE. For example, in Mark's Gospel, Jesus indicates that the nation of Israel will be destroyed, and that the temple will not be left standing. Matthew is even more explicit. Here Jesus tells a parable in which God is portrayed as burning the city and killing its inhabitants. Luke has similar passages. All these passages seem to presuppose that by the time the books were written, the destruction had happened.
Yeah, like he's laying out the case of why the later authorship is done. Like Barterman makes this case. A lot of people, it's all connected to the destruction of the temple, but not in the way that IP is going to represent it. There's more to it than the way IP is going to do here. I'm just giving a slight spoiler there. Hey, Coffee, how you doing? Well, then it smelled like shit and disappointed. That means Holy Spirit is real. There's my proof. Cheers. Thanks. Appreciate the imagery. Always appreciate the imagery. So, but yes, like this is the case. Okay. The case. And I have to say, because what Mike Jones is going to do here is he's going to focus on one point of this argument, and he's going to ignore a good chunk of the rest of it. Like there's a whole bunch more that could be said here about how Mark, there's all this connection to the Jewish revolt time period, which is like 66 to 70 AD. It's not just the destruction of the temple, though. I'm going to tell you that. There's more in there. And we'll get into that in a little bit. But this is the basic temple case, but I agree with Apologia. I don't think that this is the strongest case of why Mark is dated here. There's other internal stuff that's better. So mythicism does nothing but allow for these clowns to quote mine. Yes, probably. They do. Well, understand Blossom, and good to see you. But apologists don't need any excuses to quote mining. They have a badge in it. Like they wear it proudly. Like they always love to quote mine, as if quotations from people. It's really like an argument from authority, which doesn't have any validity to most of us, because we know that authority is only backed up by data. You got to have your data and your citations be very credible.
So as you can see, one of the main reasons for late dating Mark is that it records that Jesus predicted the temple would be destroyed. Since this happened in 70 AD, Mark must have put these words into the mouth of Jesus to fit with the events happening around him. But this seems to be presupposing the idea that Jesus didn't have the ability to predict the temple's destruction. One is merely imposing a naturalistic assumption onto the text, and then using that to date the synoptics. In other
Okay, so Mike makes an assertion about why these dates are done this way based on the temple prediction. Like Jesus couldn't have, it's a naturalistic assumption to say that Jesus couldn't, predict the future. But my response to that is, can you give me evidence that Jesus could indeed predict the future? Like, what evidence do you have that prophetic utterance and things like that are actually real? And it's interesting that he levels his criticism. I know what he's getting at. Like, you're assuming that he couldn't predict the future, but my problem with it is, why do you assume that he can? Like, what evidence do you give me that he can actually predict the future? Now, the other part of the problem with this is he kind of ignores the fact that it's more than just the destruction of the temple that causes us to do that. So stupid virtue. I'm so sorry. I hope your tentacles are okay, Cranky. But yeah, like, he doesn't seem to like, he has to make this jump into the supernatural. And it's like, it's perfectly reasonable for scholarship to assume the supernatural doesn't exist until you prove that it exists. And so far, zero. So it's like, I don't understand. You like that about tentacles, huh? Okay. But the real problem that I do have with Mike Jones at this point is like, dude, you do realize that that's kind of a miracle claim, and you kind of have to really prove a miracle claim. So a more likely explanation is that we had the temple destroyed, or in the case of Mark, I actually believe that it was written during the time of the Jewish revolt, where there's a lot of questions, a lot of rumors, innuendos, things like that. And there's other things that we're going to get into. Paul got into it in his video. I'm going to repeat some of those. But it's like, it's not just the destruction of the temple. Okay, there's a whole bunch of other things that Mark kind of indicates that he is writing during the time of the Jewish revolt. Like, there's other things that kind of indicate that it's later. Like, he's not writing at the time of Jesus Christ actually living. And he also makes a lot of mistakes that Matthew will correct. So it's like this. I don't know. I think he might have Google cloaked. It's hard to say. Yeah, he's a little circular here too. Yep. Tentacles. Okay. Oh, yes. Yeah, like it's the issue here, and I'll deal with your quote here, Fred, but the issue here to me is like, dude, you have to prove the prophecy is a real thing. Like, otherwise the people that are doing the analysis are they have every right to assume that it's not a miraculous thing. And so, because prophecy hasn't demonstrated itself very well in scientific rigor, they have the right to dismiss it and go with a more naturalistic explanation. They have, until you prove that Jesus actually predicted, like you're making the claim that Jesus predicted the future here, you might want to back that up as a way to defend yourself. But it's not, the destruction of the temple isn't just one thing. There's a whole bunch of things that go with that, and he's just ignoring that. Yeah, like, exactly. But yeah, see, it makes a little, when the gospel written, their veracity is more important to the people. So Jesus' miracle still is more likely. Yes, and that's the point. Like, it's not like there wasn't prophetic utterance out there in other mythologies. Like, you have to prove that Jesus actually predicted the future. And Otherwise, I can dismiss that. But he's also very wrong in thinking this is the only reason that we date it to this point. Like there's other things in it. I think Paul brought that out. So, but we'll get to those as we go through. Otherwise, we'll never get there. We'll never get there. Oh my goodness. Oh, and thanks, Cranky. I hope your tentacles are okay. Make sure you shower off. Yeah, if you need regular breaks from IP here, that's fine. I get it.
Words, since Jesus could not have made such an accurate prediction, Mark must have been written during the event itself. John Nolan says, New Testament critical scholarship has a curious capacity to identify as genuine prophecy that which failed to be fulfilled, and too often to insist that fulfilled prophecy is only after the event description dressed up as prophecy. The possibility of touched up prophecy is quite real, but to use the dating of Matthew on the assumption that the text could not have spoken so confidently of the coming judgment on Jerusalem and the temple if these had not already taken place represents an uncalled for imposition. Additionally, this is not really a good reason for dating the Gospel of Mark, because even if Jesus was not divine and could not see the future, there are still good reasons to see his prediction as genuine. In fact, many scholars...
Okay. Oh, shoot. I went too far back. Hold on.
widely agreed that Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple taking place represents an uncalled for imposition.
Okay, I want to talk about this. Like, IP is acting like this destruction of the temple thing is the main thing that they date the Gospel of Mark on, and that is just not true. There's other things, but yes, like this prophecy does have a problem in using it sometimes. It's the weaker form of evidence for the dating. There's better ones, which we'll get into, but yeah, he's going to go into the genuineness of whether this is a prophecy of Jesus without really proving that the rest of the Gospels are there. Now, this is like video 6 of a 13 video series. And so he's automatically assuming a couple of things. He's assuming that Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John wrote these things because he's already made that case of who wrote them. In a second video, he's assuming they're historical biographies, so you can trust them as history. He's assuming that the memory of people is good. Like, there's a whole bunch of assumptions from his earlier videos that he has here, and he's just going to roll with them. And I would have to say he didn't prove those other assumptions. So there you go. Yes. There's alternative words to that word, Cranky. You should be kind and respectful to the Earl, to the lap in which our Lord naps. Yes. Yeah, she's the Goblin Queen. She has. Yeah, you got to watch Earl. Watch Earl. I debate which one of you is more powerful.
Additionally, this is not really a good reason for dating the Gospel of Mark, because even if Jesus was not divine and could not see the future, there are still good reasons to see his prediction as genuine. In fact, many scholars believe Jesus did predict the destruction of the temple. Stephen Bryan says, "It is widely agreed that Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple."
Okay, I got to stop it right here and note the way that he is quoting this guy. Anybody else notice the 3 dots? Now, if I was a betting man, and I'm not, I would bet that there's something before that probably would indicate that he is taking this out of context. Maybe, yes, this is so. But yeah, like if you're waiting for the reasons, Elizabeth, you're in for a long wait. Okay. Yeah, it feels like a quote mine whenever I see this. Like whenever I see those 3 dots, I've used that before too, but to shorten things down because there's irrelevant parts, but I'll tell you what's there if we talk about it. He isn't going to do that. So yeah, like page. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it could be a Trojan source too. But yes, like whenever I see this, I'm automatically skeptical of whether the quote actually supports what the person is saying. I really wish he didn't do this. So, yeah, but yeah, Christians blame Christ cap all the time, especially regarding the end times, and they're all wrong. Why would they be any different? Yes. Yeah, it's you have to infer, which is why you got to remember that this is like chapter 6, okay, of Mr. Jones's case. And so he's whenever he this is one of my criticisms of how he does this whole series and his longer video is he automatically assumes that his case is airtight about the other points. Like he once he establishes the gospels as biographies, he never jumps off that ship. Once he establishes to his mind that Mark wrote Mark, Matthew wrote Matthew, Luke wrote Luke, and John wrote John, he never gets off of that until he does a later video where he dives into it on detail. Once he establishes that the early church memories, oral traditions, and stuff are far stronger than everybody wants to believe, he never gets off of that. Like he assumes those assumptions for the rest of the series. And it's been an interesting thing because if I want to respond to that. So I just if you're gonna, yeah, it's volume 3, page 2050. Yes. Yeah, there you go. But yeah, like it's just like there's just so much here, and it's apologetics. Like this is where the apologetics starts to beat him up because he's running with so many assumptions, and it just drives me bats. It just does. Yeah, it's like, yeah. So, white notes are better than halfies. Yeah, yeah. The Gospels were written after the events described when they were written, but the character called Jesus is not the actual Jew, seeming he was the one. Who agreed with this view that Jesus predicted the destruction of Cannibal? A few people. Yeah, I don't think he's paying attention. Like there's a certain mentality, Elizabeth, to apologetics where they get really black and white, they get very focused, and it all stems from the fatal flaw of this whole thing, which in my own video series responding to all this, there's going to be this constant statement. This is what happens when you form the conclusion and then try to do your research to prove your conclusion. And then you just look at whatever proves your conclusion and you never look at the problems with that. You never look at the alternatives. Mike Jones has a very bad habit of starting with his conclusion and then working his way backwards, trying to find. And so when he sees some evidence that supports this, he grabs it, pulls it, and presents it. He literally ignores a whole bunch of stuff that counters what he wants to say, sometimes in the very books he's quoting. So there you go. Yeah, no, it's just not good thinking. But yeah, like it's Robin too, yeah. JW agrees. John Lennox, probably Dennis Prager, who doesn't believe in Jesus, maybe agrees. Yeah, I mean Gary Habermas probably agrees with that, but yeah, I don't. Of course, the problem with the Markian prediction that Jesus uses, he makes some mistakes, even in the immediate destruction of the temple. Like I think it's the Mark says that not one stone will be left on the other, and the wall is still there, and there's a pile of stones after the destruction. So yes, so there you go.
The scholar Michael Patrick Barber has also put forward numerous arguments that Jesus really did make this prediction during his ministry. First, the idea Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple is a deeply embedded tradition that shows up in multiple passages, including passages that are separate from what we find in Mark. If the tradition was made up during or after the Jewish War, it would have been added to multiple passages that ended up in the canonical Gospels.
He would have a better case here. Like, because, dude, okay, the fact that the destruction of the temple appears in John, which is written after Mark, like he seems to miss the point. Like, dude, all of these things are written after Mark. Like, where you have a prediction of the destruction of the temple. Like, it's, dude, that means that they just used Mark They just use Mark. Okay. And it would be more helpful if you actually had like an example from a gospel of Jesus predicting the destruction of the temple before the Gospel of Mark. Like if there was a source that, like one of the other gospels that shows Jesus predicting the destruction of the temple. I don't know if that even exists. That's why I'm going to do some of my own studies on my own into the other gospels. But this is not helping your case because you're literally just quoting Mark, John, Luke, Matthew. 3 of those are after Mark. Like everybody agrees with that mostly. I don't see too many outliers that say Matthew wrote before Mark anymore. There's just too much evidence that Matthew kind of looked at Mark and corrected it. So it's like you have this, they're all after the fact there, Mike. Like that doesn't show an established tradition. That shows an established tradition happened after the temple was destroyed. Like it's like, dude, like you're literally disproving your own case and he doesn't even realize it. Like, come on, man. Like all you're showing is that the tradition of the destruction of the temple started with Mark. That's all you're doing. So let's see, Mark Barber is impressed with theology, scripture, Catholic thought of John Paul. Oh, so he's a Catholic. Outstanding. Book Revelation applying its lessons today and reasons of faith. Like, oh, okay. Yeah, I've never heard of him. But yeah, thanks, Azo. I appreciate that. You're always on spot with the research, and I appreciate that. But yeah, like he's saying this is a long established tradition. Yeah, after Mark. Come on. Oh, this just frustrates me. Like and the problem is the most people that are watching this, they're not like you and me. They're not being skeptical. They're just eating it all up. This is just sugar. So it's like, dude, you just, sure, there's a tradition, like show me a quote before the destruction of the temple. Oh, that's right. You're assuming that 3 of these people wrote before the destruction of the temple. But if it's after Mark, you only have established that there's a tradition after Mark. You still doesn't do the dating thing. So I don't know. Got to stop lifting casts. Yes. They really do.
E.P. Sanders noted the prediction does seem to be a deeply implanted tradition. James D.G. Dunn says, according to the tradition, the key charge brought against Jesus was that he had threatened to destroy the temple.
Yes, and the tradition is all established from the Gospels whose dating we're discussing. Like, this doesn't prove that the dating is wrong. This just proves that the tradition had a certain order, and after Mark, it was continued to be followed. So what? This doesn't establish that Jesus predicting the temple's destruction happened before Mark. Like, do you have something before Mark where Jesus is predicting the destruction of the temple? No. So, yeah, I don't give lectures, I give sermons, yes. Hey, Modern Atheism, good to see you. So, but yeah, like I don't understand. I do not understand why we're sitting here talking about an established tradition of Jesus predicting the destruction of the temple when the only one that might have been doing it during the actual siege of Jerusalem, Jewish war, is Mark. And everybody else writes after that and establishes the tradition after Mark writes. You still haven't proven that Mark is before this time period. This doesn't prove that until you give me a source that shows me that Jesus predicted the destruction of the temple before Mark. Like, I don't understand. This is just really bad reasoning. And man,
of the tradition is clear, as also its diverse elaboration in the different versions. Jesus' talk of destroying the temple. The case for recognizing an historical memory enshrined here is surprisingly strong.
Yes, because the Bible proves the Bible, Mike. You're basically using the Bible to prove the Bible. What the literal hell? Like, come on. You're trying to prove something about the Gospels and when they're dated and you're using the Bible to prove the Bible, that the Bible has this tradition of Jesus predicting the destruction of the temple. So flipping what? Okay. Like, yes, it's a goddamn circle and it drives me nuts. Yeah, the Bible a little bit, but like, this is so horrible. This reasoning is just so bad. It drives me nuts when people do this. When apologists do this, it just drives me nuts. It's like, yes, please prove the Bible with the Bible. That's always such a good move.
Barber also notes it's unlikely Mark would have made this up. Mark reports in chapter 14 that during the crucifixion, many bore witness against Jesus, saying, "We heard him say, 'I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made with hands.'"
So Mark proves Mark? Have we really gone to the gospel itself proves the gospel? And you're quoting that guy, and again, and he's a Catholic, right? So he doesn't have any reasons to believe, like there's no motivations for him to believe this shit. Yeah. Yeah. Earl, it's like, I don't know what he's still doing it. He's still doing it. He's using the Bible to prove the Bible. He's still doing it.
Mark and Matthew's handling of their report indicates they're not comfortable with how the saying of Jesus was formulated by Christian opponents. Barber notes this indicates Jesus' prediction may have been misinterpreted in different ways by the people around him. But this seems to indicate the saying of Jesus was contested, and the Christians had to give an account of what Jesus actually said versus what they perceived as twisted versions of this.
Okay, what other versions of Jesus predicting the destruction of the temple are outside the Bible to show that this was twisted or whatever? Like, that seems to be, once again, that's a huge assumption. Like, this is something I have to remark on at this point, and apologists do this all the flipping time. If you ever watch Kip Davis or Digital Hammurabi or some of the other scholarly shows that deal with the biblical text, like Hebrew text, Greek text, all of them, you ever notice that their language is very selective and they're not as definitively like, this is hardcore, this is what it is? Like, they're always speaking in probabilistic terms. You think there's a reason for that, Mike Jones? You think there's a reason for that? Like, you're speaking very confidently about stuff that isn't that established. Like, there's a reason scholars, hedge their language a little bit and they talk in, well, it seems most likely that this is true. They don't sit there and say that this is true. You guys come out here and say, there's a long established tradition. And you're like, yeah, if the Bible proves the Bible, like I really wish that Mike Jones would learn, if he's been so busted on this so many times, I really wish he would learn, stop being so dogmatic. Stop being so dogmatic on this is what it says. Because the truth of the matter is, most scholars, when they study languages, they study ancient literature, they're not going to make these kind of confident assertions. And it's unfortunate that it's unfortunate that you apologists have to have, as part of your shtick, you have to have this absolute confidence in what you're saying is true to convince the masses that the religion is true. Because when scholars study the Bible, when they study the Old Testament, New Testament, when they study other pieces of literature, they don't speak this arrogantly. Okay? They don't. And there's a reason for that. And you need to pick that up.
Dale Allison remarks, when the tradition struggles this much with a saying, one is prodded to infer that it goes back to something Jesus said, something which, because so well known, generally disallowed, even though Luke managed it, discreet silence. Another aspect of the tradition is in Mark 13, where Jesus said, "Do you see these great buildings? There will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down." Jesus
I'm sorry, Cranky. But thank you very much. Yeah, the poor elder gods. They look at apologists and say, "Holy shit, is this tainted the rest of the supply?" Like, oh my goodness. But no, like we're here we go. Here we go with the fact that Mark got it wrong. Okay, so Mark's Jesus gets it wrong about his prediction. So therefore, that proves that it couldn't have been written after the fact. I can already see this coming. We're going to completely gloss over the fact that Jesus got it wrong. That Mark records the words of Jesus and Jesus got it wrong. We're going to completely ignore that fact. And we're going to try to make it this proof that Mark had the right before the destruction of the temple, which a lot of people don't contest anyway, but that's where we're going. So here we go.
This was probably being hyperbolic, as he often was. But scholars have noted this does not correlate.
Hyperbolic, no. You can't do that with when you make the claim about Jesus that he's God in human flesh. Like, do you apologists, Mike, do you realize what that does to theology of who Jesus is? You've made Jesus now somebody who can misrepresent the truth by being hyperbolic. Like, do you apologists? Yeah, it's bullshit then. Yes. Like I don't understand why these apologists don't think about, okay, what does this do to our theology of Jesus Christ? Like, what does this do? Like, if Jesus is being hyperbolic and thus because he's being hyperbolic, he completely miffs it. Like, not one stone will be left on the other. And then there's a wall left. And there's a pile of stones that are still stacked on each other. Go to the Temple Mound today. I mean, come on. And you're going to sit here and tell me, well, Jesus is just being hyperbolic. He wasn't trying to be super duper accurate. Well, then if he's not being super duper accurate there, why is he super duper accurate anywhere else? Do you guys realize what that does to your Christology? I swear, maybe it's because I have a degree in theological studies. It's like, do you apologists realize what some of your conclusions do? Like, this is just one of them. You just made Jesus into somebody who's joking and fallible. Do you realize that? Like, you're accepting the fallibility of Jesus Christ. Do you realize what that does to your theology? Come on. So, yeah, I know you lied already. So, oh my gosh. Why did Jesus know Moses? I don't know. I don't know. So, well, yeah, but I get that, Evan. But the Christians believe that Jesus is all God, all man, and whatever he says is absolutely the gospel. When you introduce the even possibility that Jesus can be hyperbolic, then if he's hyperbolic here and he's over exaggerating, why isn't he over exaggerating everywhere else? And what does that do to the theology of Jesus Christ? What does that do to Christology for Christians? It screws it up. Like, now you can't, when Jesus says, I'm the way and the truth and the life, no one comes to the Father but by me, is he being hyperbolic? You have introduced the possibility that anything that Jesus says is hyperbolic. And I don't think Mike Jones realizes what he just did here, because he's so intent on saying, this means that Mark predates the fall of the temple because he got it wrong. Okay. Okay. And we're going to make the excuse that it's hyperbolic. He doesn't say, well, Jesus got it wrong. So what does that do to Jesus's, ability to predict the future? Because he obviously got that part wrong. Oh, he's being hyperbolic. Yeah. And he didn't just put his foot in it with me as the atheist who's looking back. He's put his foot in it with other Christian theologians and scholars, because now I've got if I'm still back in theology and Christianity, I've got something to explain away. Like, how can I explain that Jesus is being hyperbolic at times, and where is he being hyperbolic and when is he not? Like, there's a whole packle of things there. So it would have been smarter to say that, well, Jesus is actually predicting the destruction of the temple the third time, and that's when all the blocks will be knocked down, like, and avoid the whole discussion of the temple destruction in 70 AD. It's like, it would have been much, much smarter for them to do that. But he's like, Mike, if I was still a Christian theologian, I'd be wringing your neck.
Relate with how the temple was destroyed. If one was to invent a prediction of the temple's destruction after the fact, we should expect they would have made it accurate to how the temple and the city were destroyed, not write about it hyperbolically, and allow for the possibility that your audience could have.
That word hyperbolically is doing a lot of heavy lifting there, Mike. You don't have any proof that that's what's going on. That's your assessment because it allows you to get past the fact that Jesus was wrong in his prediction. That's the problem. Thanks, Wolf. Fangs knows my heart, or does he? I don't know. That's 4. Got one more. What's winning? The Holy Bunny Hat is winning. Of course it is. It's Friday and it's Holy Bunny Hat. But yeah, I don't think he understands what he's doing here to theology, because now you have to induce an interpretive method where, is Jesus being hyperbolic or not? Like, is he over exaggerating or not? Yeah, hyper Jesus. Yeah, he doesn't want Jesus to be wrong. At the same time, he's also trying to prove Mark was written before 70 AD, which even the critical scholars are saying it's around there. That might be the latest date for it. They're not going there. So there you go.
Misunderstood and assumed Jesus made an error. Additionally, during the Jewish war, Christians fled to the city of Pella, whereas Jesus advised to flee to the mountains. In the prophet.
Oh, that makes it even worse, because how do you get hyperbolic out of that? Like, how do you how do you get that? Like, how does that work? Like, because now his prediction is completely off. How do you get hyperbolic out of that? Like, we're going to suddenly ignore that our excuse for Jesus getting the prophecy wrong in Mark, because we have a historian that says this is where they fled to, whereas, and the people in Judea will flee to the mountains, is what Jesus says. But what actually happened in the Jewish war is they didn't flee anywhere near the mountains. So how did Jesus get it so horribly wrong? Hey, Martin. That's fine. And it is the Holy Bunny Hat. So, respecting my members, here we go. I'll make this... we'll do this. So there we go. So I have to be very careful talking about Fangs, because it'll end up being automatic dogma, because that's how this works. If you're wearing the Holy Bunny Hat and I say something about Fangs, it becomes dogma. So there you go. But yes, you think a 5-minute timeout is warranted? Yeah, like it could be a misstrategy. But no, like he's completely glossing over the complete myth of Mark's Jesus during this, because when the temple was destroyed, they didn't flee to the mountains. But Mark's Jesus predicts that the people would flee to the mountains. They didn't do that. Eusebius I think it's Eusebius. I'm going to make this larger so I can see it. Yeah, it's Eusebius. They ended up fleeing other places. They didn't go. They didn't go to the mountains after the temple was destroyed. So we're going to completely ignore that. We can't bring in hyperbolic statements in here, can we? So yeah, it's always been dogma. There you go. It's dogma. It's always been dogma. Come on. The Holy Bunny Hat is sacred. It's the thing that's the key to being a great religion, allegedly, Fred. You have to have a good hat. Like, the Catholics have great hats. Let's give it to them. So, I've met you, Sedona, before. The official seed of Fangs is a gray rabbit. I can't read the other word. Nice try, Cranky. Oh, my goodness. Well, yeah, like Mike is just completely ignoring the fact that Jesus whiffed it. Like like the prophecy of Mark's Jesus is completely wrong then. He got it wrong. So he's a false prophet.
prophecy. Jesus said to pray it does not happen in the winter, but the temple was destroyed in the summer. These details do not make sense if one was writing after the fact.
No, that one's completely irrelevant. That's kind of I would say that's a non sequitur. Like Jesus is predicting, he's openly saying, pray that your flight does and be written. He's adding some ambiguity. I'll grant Jesus ambiguity on that one. That's not a hard prophecy. Okay. And then it ends up happening in summer, Jesus is kind of indicating that there's some flexible time there about this stuff. And so, but it's not a missed prophecy. It's more of a, pray that this doesn't happen in winter kind of thing. So what? Oh, I did read it. Fangs protected me from the last word. I can bring that. Oh my goodness. Dating a scripture, yes. Yeah, like this one bothers me too, Earl, because I don't think this is about the dating of scripture. The whole issue that he's spending so much time on the destruction of the temple, he seems to have forgotten there are other reasons why we date Mark there, but he's going on and on about this because as an apologist, he has to focus on a single point that he thinks is completely detrimental. But most scholars, when they talk about the dating of Mark, this is only one point that they make. There's other points to be made. Maybe that's a good time to bring those in. But when they date Mark, they also consider a couple of other things. The Jewish war in the temple has other things in it. Like Jesus says, many will come claiming to be messiahs in my name. And some of the time that fits is like 67, 68. I think there was a zealot that took over the temple at that time that kind of started the Jewish war was going on, and there's a whole bunch of shit going on. And the peace of Rome had kind of been completely screwed for Palestine. And so there's an abomination of desolation claim in Mark. And there's a line in Mark where he says, let the reader understand, which kind of indicates that this is a little bit of time has passed. Or we're in the middle of this thing, the Jewish war. Let the reader understand. And he's talking about the abomination of desolation. And that has a directly correlated event to the time frame of the Jewish war. So it's like, let the reader understand, kind of indicating he's writing at the same time as the Jewish war. There's other things like Mark says, like when Judas throws down, they buy the field for the criminals and stuff with the money Judas gave them. It's called the field of blood to this day, indicating a great deal of passage of time. So there's a whole bunch of things. And I'm just hitting the tip of the iceberg of people who do literary analysis, that there's all kinds of things in Mark that indicate that he's writing why the Jewish war is going on. Like there's the Romans are fighting the Jews, and in the middle of all that, that's what's happening. He's writing the Gospel of Mark, and he's bringing in Jesus. And the thing about Mark, though, is there's no resurrection narrative. There's no birth narrative. There's just like Jesus is presented as one of those alternative prophets, and that's how you get what you get. But yes, like there's a whole bunch of other stuff. Jesus is views, Mark's view of Christ. Of course, Mark is used by Luke and Matthew. So he's avoiding all that, and he's focused on the temple because that's where he thinks he can win his points. So same time as the rest of the world was created. Yeah, like you're right. Like this is a thing. So they're obsessed with dating on these relationships when we go out. Yes. Yeah, that's possible. Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, like we've had them before. So okay, there you go. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you handling it. But yeah, like Erlen, this is the problem. Like he's obsessed with this one point because he thinks it's so key to dating, and he's going to get to that in a minute.
It seems more likely these lines go back to the historical Jesus. As Marcus Borg said, if Jesus did not prophesy about Jerusalem, then who was the insightful prophet in that generation who was responsible both for this concern and the use of the Hebrew Bible? Quite probably, the Jesus movement and perhaps the evangelists reworked the language of the threats, but without an initial impulse from Jesus, it is difficult to account for their presence in the primitive tradition.
And I have to ask, what primitive tradition are we talking about other than the Gospels themselves? Like, once again, the Bible's proving the Bible? What the hell?
Additionally, predicting the destruction of the temple before it happened was consistent with first-century Jewish thought. A fragmented text from Qumran seems to indicate they thought Jerusalem would be destroyed. In 1 Thessalonians 2, Paul seems to indicate the Jewish authorities would suffer divine judgment for rejecting.
Do I have to say it again? Can we all say it in a chorus? You're using the Bible to prove the Bible. Like, come on. I mean, I get you can quote different letters and stuff to kind of show that there was this kind of thing, but where is your source outside the Bible that indicates this is so? Like, yes, there was probably a lot of messianic figures going out. That's one of the true things, that Monty Python actually deals with in Life of Brian. Is like everybody, there's got all these messianic figures, particularly at the time of the Jewish War. Like all of them there's a bunch of them trying to come up with that. So, yeah, okay, fair point. So yeah, I don't mind minors coming here supposedly, but no, I'd rather they didn't. so this was coming. Yes, Jesus told us to be coming. Yeah, it would be great propaganda, and I think that's why. Like you see a change in Christianity after the destruction of the temple, and we'll probably actually get to that in this video too. So we're going to keep moving on. Serious question. There are all these ancient incidents. The archaeologists should have dated this. Use your metaback data. Did IP ever consider that with us? Yes. Several have been dated that way. The problem is everybody openly admits that the original texts are lost. So that's another problem. But the copies that we have one that has John on it, a fragment of John that goes back to when we think John, a little bit after when we think John was written, like 110, I think is the date on that, radiometrically. Like radiometric dating gives a range anyway. So we have actually done so. But yeah, like there's that. Yeah, otherwise it has to be, or I'd be wrong. Yes. But once again, we're using the Bible passages to prove the Bible and not going outside the Bible to give us some sort of secondary source to look at. Like just because the Bible says these things were happening doesn't necessarily mean that's right either. So yes. Yeah, not with him making Riverbutt comments. It's probably not a good place for a minor to be.
In Jesus. Barber notes the expression Paul uses could easily be understood as prophetic and not having already occurred. And this is likely
Once again, does anybody else notice that these are all Bible quotes? Like we're using the Bible to prove the Bible still. Like has he stepped outside of this to show any kind of scholarship that says what he's saying here outside people referencing the Bible? I just haven't seen it yet, I guess.
An allusion to Jesus' prediction, given the similarities in content, meaning we have an indication Jesus' prediction existed prior to 70 AD. Josephus tells us of another figure, Jesus ben Ananias, who also predicted the temple's destruction before it happened.
Okay, that's great. This is a source outside the Bible, but Josephus doesn't say it was Jesus. So there was a tradition of people predicting the destruction of Jerusalem and temple, and but that kind of cuts against you then, doesn't it? Because now we don't just have Jesus getting it right. We have this other person getting it right too. Why aren't we calling them the Messiah? Like, why aren't they a prophet?
Which does have some similarities to Jesus' prediction. Barber does point out there is no evidence of literary dependence. The verbal overlaps between the predictions is limited to legal language. Even more important to this, we can see the book of Daniel predicted the destruction of the temple as well.
Holy Jesus. Daniel? Really, Daniel? All right, I'm not going to deep dive the issue of Daniel being involved here, but when you consider the problematic nature of Daniel as a piece of literature in and of itself, it's probably not the best source to be saying anything.
Which Jesus drew on when uttering his prediction. And also his prediction seems to have drawn on the language used to predict the first temple's destruction, and doesn't seem to draw on the events of 70 AD. So if the book of Daniel predicted the temple's destruction, which many Jews of the time saw as authoritative, we should expect someone like Jesus to restate this prophecy. And because of this, there is no reason to assume Jesus' prediction was not authentic.
Okay, so let me take you at your word there, Mike Jones, that it was authentic. Okay. In that prediction, he predicts that not one stone is left upon another, which doesn't happen. Okay. Now you say that's hyperbolic. I say that that's theologically problematic to say it's hyperbolic. He got it wrong. In fact, you brought up the fact that the people didn't flee to the mountains like Jesus predicted. So Jesus got that wrong too. So by those two strikes, I can use the Old Testament and say he got the prediction wrong. He's a false prophet and should be labeled as a false prophet. Thank you for giving us the ammunition to show that Jesus was a false prophet. I appreciate that. I will. Hold on. What time is it? Oh, yeah, I've been at it for an hour. I usually go a little longer for the break, so because it's Friday and I can go longer, but yeah, I will. Thank you, Earl. I appreciate that. I like it when people look out for me. Yeah, slap the like button too. Appreciate it. But yeah, okay, it's authentic. I'll grant you that it's authentic and Jesus said it. Okay, he got so much shit wrong. He got a lot of shit wrong. He just did. And you even pointed out one of the things he got wrong. It's hilarious.
There does seem to be a precedent from before 70 AD to predict the temple's destruction. Additionally, the first temple was destroyed, and Israel's sin was said to be the
So thank you for also telling us that Jesus was not unique and he still got it wrong.
cause. If the temple authorities were perceived as corrupt, it is likely many Jews, including Jesus, would have seen this as a sign the temple would be destroyed again. So given all this, there is no reason to assume the prophecy in the Synoptics means that they post-date the destruction of the temple. In addition,
No, it doesn't. In fact, the people that do the dating of Mark actually say that the book of Mark might have been written just slightly before the destruction of the temple. That's why Mark's Jesus gets the no stone on top of one another wrong. Okay, but always being hyperbolic. Yeah, well, you still have to deal with the fact that the Jews didn't flee to the mountains like Jesus said they were going to. so there you go. All right.
other factors indicate that the Synoptics were written before the temple's destruction.
That does not follow, because you can literally have Mark written in 69 AD, and that's before the destruction of the temple, right? So that still throws Matthew and Luke 10 years past the destruction of the temple, and it still throws John way back there, which you've already admitted to. So honestly, like that, Mark, the scholars that are talking about Mark are talking about it being at the time of the Jewish war. That would be before the destruction of the temple. Nobody's playing that game. But then if that's the case, then you have a prophecy of Jesus that is completely and utterly wrong. They didn't flee to the mountains. They fled somewhere else. You can say it's hyperbolic all you want, but you still don't have stones. He'll still have stones on top of one another, and Jesus predicted there wouldn't be one on top of the other. It's like, or Mark was being hyperbolic when he presented his prophetic Jesus and didn't know what the outcome was going to be at the time. So it's like, come on. All right, I'm going to take my break because Earl is right. I probably do need to take it now. I'll give you this wonderful 2-minute piece of absolute epic storytelling from I Killed Earl. And we'll come back to this. I haven't gotten very far in this. I don't know if I'm going to finish it. I'm just frustrated right now because Mike literally is avoiding talking about the problems that his own viewpoint brings up. He's like literally dodging them. So, but I will be back in just a little bit. I'll see you then. All right, I absolutely love that, Earl. It's actually the sound of a baby dolphin. I did not know that. I did not know that. That's outstanding. No loops. Yeah, onions are dolphins now. All right, yeah, I'm going to keep going here. I will have to say, I'll probably, when I do my series on this and I get to this point, I'll probably point out that this live stream expresses my frustration with Mike Jones, because he's already demonstrated that he likes to stick on point to the fact that some of the things he brings up actually causes other problems, and he doesn't want to address them. So there you go. So, all right. So here we go. Let's continue on. Let's forage on, see if he has any other points to make.
In the Synoptics and Acts, they often noted if something significant had already passed. The Gospel authors routinely noted how Old Testament passages were fulfilled in Christ. In Acts 11:28, Luke notes a prophecy was uttered about a great famine, but mentioned this happened in the days of Claudius. This means Luke was written after the famine occurred.
I have to stop. I have to make my disclaimer about the book of Acts. If there is anything that deserves Apologia's jingle for the Bible tells me so, it's any quote from the book of Acts. Because once again, like if you're going to use the Bible to prove the Bible, you need to understand that the book of Acts is probably the least historically secure book of the Bible. Like there is nothing in antiquity that backs it up. Like it's just, there's nothing there. So there you go. Yeah, like I think Bible scholars would really, really like to know that.
Likewise, when the Gospels mention Judas, they routinely note he would later betray Jesus, since they are obviously writing after the fact. However, given this standard, it is odd they do not mention the temple was destroyed as Jesus predicted. If they were writing after the temple's destruction, given their style, we should expect them to note when this was fulfilled, especially since this was the most catastrophic of them all. But they don't, and instead.
Yeah, see, Evan's got it right about the lore for Fangs, and I want to make it official while I am wearing the Holy Bunny hat, that the official steed, the original origin story for the story of the tortoise and the hare is Fangs and a turtle. Okay. And the turtle. So that is official. The turtle, Fangs prefers riding on the turtle because it allows him to chill and relax and take it slow while he's has taken your stash and has started to use it. So there you go. Thanks, Evan, too, by the way. Thank you. There we go. But gee, Mike, you made me lose my train of thought. The fact that they don't mention it doesn't prove a thing. Like Mark wouldn't mention it because it hadn't happened yet. But it's interesting that Matthews spends an inordinate amount of time correcting Mark's misstatements, geography problems. Like Matthew is obviously a Jewish person that's well connected with Palestine, and so he spends a lot of time correcting things. I'm not sure they're non-mention. Like John clearly, seems to indicate that he knows the temple is destroyed. The writer of John does. And that's a later tradition, and it could be a community of thing too as well. So, but Matthew and Luke not mentioning it, I don't think so. Laziest dogs in existence, yeah, probably. There you go.
Instead, the prophecy is written as a warning of something coming in the future. As Jonathan Bernier says, an urgent question nonetheless presents itself to those who argue that these passages were written post-70, with the destruction of the temple in view. Why warn people of an event that has already happened?
Ooh, pick me. Because they were just copying Mark and then correcting him. Like Mark had it in there. And so they're following Mark's outline and then adding to it. So they just put it in there. Just Yes, they can be, but I think and we'll make Fangs' official turtle seed Oscar too. I think that's a good official name. Oscar seems like a really good name. That for a turtle, that's outstanding, by the way. So yes, furry siblings. I have no idea, but yes, like this is like, dude, you do realize that Matthew and Luke quote Mark prolifically. Why wouldn't they quote his prediction of the destruction of the temple and then change it to fit what actually happened a little bit more? Like there wasn't post hoc prophecies before. Like, yeah. So go. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
This can also explain why John, writing later, left out the warning altogether, as he saw no need to give the warning after the event had happened. The synoptics include the warning because the fulfillment had not yet occurred.
Or hear me out, Mike, they're just doing what they've done consistently throughout their books of copying Mark.
Similar to this line of reasoning, it is obvious Matthew's Gospel was written for a Jewish audience, with special attention on facts about Jerusalem. Rodney Reeves says, most scholars contend that Matthew's Gospel was written by a Jew for Jews. Special attention to the field Judas hanged himself in would have been irrelevant for a scattered Jewish population after 70 AD. Mentioning the importance of the temple tax after 70 AD would have been problematic, as it would have been going to a pagan temple.
Yes, except I think Apologia makes a note on the temple tax that they were still paying the temple tax after the destruction. Like the Jews still had to pay it, and it was a voluntary thing. The fact that the way that parable reads out, it's almost like it's dealing with the modern problem of the temple being destroyed and whether or not to pay the tax at all, because it was a pre-existing tax. So I think Apologia brought that out in his video, but I'll bring it out here too. Like the fact that that's included in Matthew kind of seems to be dealing with the after fact of the destruction of the temple. So you can actually make that argument the other way because, hey, we're the children, we're free. We don't have to pay this pagan tax because it's not our temple anymore, but we're gonna voluntarily. That's what we're gonna do. It's like Mike seems to miss the point that this could also be used the other way. Like, why include this? Matthew is the only one that includes this story. Why would he include it? Oh, because now there's a pagan temple there, and do we pay the tax or not anymore? Should we have to pay that or not? Like that becomes an issue for the Christians and the Jewish Christians at the time. Matthew's a Jew writing to Jews. Do we pay this tax or not? Do we do that? Uh-oh. Hold on. Hopefully I'm not losing connectivity. All right, hold on. Seems I'm there. Am I losing connectivity? Am I back? Oh, okay. Am I back? Can I get somebody in the chat tell me if I'm back or not? All right, there we go. All right. I'm sorry about that. It looked like I lost connectivity for a little bit. I'm gonna have to pull up all my stuff again because I lost it here on StreamYard. So hold on for just a second while I pull all this stuff back up. I'm gonna have to find my video again here. All right, let's open that back up.
Most scholars date the Gospels to after 7.
Yeah, I know. I gotta find the right spot now. Where am I at?
That in Matthew 23, temple was destroyed as Jesus predicted. If they were writing after the temple's destruction, he says. The warning, because the fulfillment had not yet occurred. Similar to this line of reasoning, it is obvious Matthew's gospel was written for a Jewish audience, with special attention on facts about Jerusalem. Rodney Reeves says, most scholars contend that Matthew's gospel was written by a Jew for Jews.
Yeah, that's a pretty open contention. I didn't remark on that earlier, so that's pretty well established.
Special attention to the field Judas hanged himself in would have been irrelevant for a scattered Jewish population after 70 AD. Mentioning the importance of the temple tax after 70 AD would have been problematic, as it would have been going to a pagan temple.
Okay, that's where we were. Okay, and I was remarking on that. Yes. I'm going to say, Rimmer, that this video is for Christians. The problem that Mike did is he got on a couple live streams and said stuff to the effect of, no atheist has ever dealt with this. Like this is data point after data point, and no atheist has ever done it. And then Paul did it, and now I'm doing it. He doesn't. It's like he had this series, and no atheist was reacting to it, and so he said that just proves that it's true. So Okay, good. I'm back. Man, I hate it when that happens. But at least now, like a year ago with StreamYard, if you lost connectivity, you lost the stream. You don't necessarily lose the stream anymore. So that's a good thing. They figure out a way to hold you so you're still connected to the stream. You just have to get back in. So that's good news. But yeah, he was sounding off, and Paul took him up on it, and I'm taking it up on it. So he can't make that claim anymore. Like, I think he was making it as a flex, like nobody's taking on my data because my data is so strong. So so there we go. Yeah, it was crappy enough that nobody cared. So I'm doing it because I'm doing these live reactions. I'm also working on a whole series of reaction to his whole 6 hour long piece of shit, but because it's really bad. Like he wants to say apologia is bad, and I'm like looking at his long video and listening to it like, this is bad stuff. Like, you don't know it. So yeah, it is. It is oddly appropriate. That's why I'm doing a video series too, because I know I have the possibility of wearing some hat, Cranky, and that's going to make me look sad. So yeah, misdatage measuring. Yeah, like I think that was kind of it too. Like, he's like, yeah, you ain't going to do that. And I'm like, yeah, okay, buddy, we'll do that.
In Matthew 5, Jesus gives instructions on how to offer a sacrifice at the temple. Information that would have been useless to include in his gospel account if the temple was already destroyed when Matthew.
Okay, on the surface, that sounds like a good point, but it's absolutely bullshit. The Jews in the Talmud and other writings that they have often still talk about the proper sacrifices. They do this to this day about how the proper sacrifice should be offered up in the temple. They don't consider such advice useless. And Matthew, as a Jew writing to Jews, wouldn't have considered it useless either. Okay. They still want to maintain the traditions and the proper understanding of how to do the sacrifices at the temple, right? They still want to do that. So the idea, okay, if what he's saying is true and they wouldn't do that in the Gospels, why are they still doing it to this day, talking about how to do things properly in the temple? Wouldn't that be considered useless? Why are you doing that if the temple doesn't exist? Because they believe that the temple will be restored. It is very possible that Matthew himself had the view that someday this would all be restored. Like, this would all be put back together. Like, he had this belief. Matthew himself may have had this belief. The writer, at least of Matthew, had this belief that someday the temple would be restored. And so we still have to keep that. Yeah, well, we have more information about the followers of Jesus than Jesus himself on that regard. So, yes, all of these criticisms are Fangs' holy doctrine. So just so you know that. Fangs is very critical. So, yeah, so. Wait, time for that. That's exactly what Paul said, and it's exactly what I kind of said, but here we are. So there you go. But like, I'm not trying to be rude. Just because something no longer exists doesn't mean that the people that follow that religion wouldn't consider that advice valuable. And if Matthew thinks Jesus is the writer of Matthew thinks Jesus is the Messiah, okay, he's going to feel like if the temple is going to be restored someday, all of that stuff is still going to be useful. So, yeah. Christians are weird about setting Jesus apart from Jews sometimes. Yes.
Was right.
So this is horrible
Charles
criticism.
L. Corals adds that in Matthew 23, Jesus gives instructions for taking an oath before the altar. This information would only be relevant for Matthew's readers if the altar.
Then why is it relevant to Jews to this day? I bet you there's advice on how to take an oath before the altar in writings by Jewish people from the time of the destruction of the temple up to this present day. If they're going to make a commentary on the Old Testament law and how to do the Jewish rituals, that commentary is still valuable in case the temple is ever still restored. Your argument doesn't hold water here. Okay. Like, sorry, it just doesn't. Okay. Hey, Canada. So I don't think he does, because otherwise I don't think he would have made this observation, because a Jew would have told him, we still do that to this day since the temple's destruction.
Altar was still in use and the temple still intact. In fact, Quarles points out, in rabbinic literature, we see almost no evidence of oaths sworn by the temple in a post-70 AD time period. To quote, "The oath formulas of Matthew 23:16-22 seem to support a date of composition earlier than the date currently affirmed by the majority of scholars. The oath formulas in the Mishnah, Tosefta, Jerusalem Talmud, and Babylonian Talmud suggest that swearing by the temple was relatively common prior to the destruction of the temple, but very rare thereafter."
Yeah, but also, isn't this, you're claiming to record the words of Jesus. So why wouldn't he make that remark while he was still alive as a character? Like, I don't need him to be a historical figure, but if he's a character commenting on current religious practice, he would still might do that. Like, there's whole tons of reasons why you would still do this, like practice that continues to be there, the hope that the temple will be restored someday, and so you want some commentary on it. Like, there's or it's a fictional character, and of course he's going to comment about this because he's a Jewish worshiper himself. So I just don't understand. I don't understand the reasoning here why this can't be. Like, why would they not? Why would they remark about this stuff? Like, if it's after the destruction of the Jewish temple? Well, because you're trying to present the fact that Jesus said it, the character of Jesus said it. Like, are you, Mike, you kill me.
So what Matthew teaches fits with the pre-70 AD time period. John Wenham says, Matthew's account looks like a
Okay, I just want to warn everybody. Here we go with the presuppositions, just so you're ready for them.
vivid record of a terrible clash between Jesus and the religious leaders, rather than a veiled polemic of church against synagogue. Some of the apologetic, e.g. the account of the suicide of Judas and the account of the guards at the tomb, seem of no great theological significance, yet of particular interest to those who frequented Jerusalem. As time progressed, the church movement became predominantly Gentile.
I'm not trying to be, because he brings up the suicide of Judas and the guard at the tomb. Those would be of particular interest to Christians regardless of time frame. Like, they're apologetic elements. Like, what happened to Judas is a question you can ask any time after what happened to Judas. Like, I don't see why that's significant, that it had to be significant just for people in Jerusalem. And what happened to Judas doesn't have minor theological significance, because he's considered the son of perdition. He's doomed to go to hell. Like, these are theological considerations, and they're not small ones. The guard on the tomb is obviously an apologetic thing, where we're trying to say, oh, they couldn't have stole the body because the tomb was guarded. And, oh, the reason they didn't have that story, like, they paid him off to lie. Like, it's absolutely can be written after the destruction of Jerusalem, those things. Like, your setting is in Jerusalem for your writing. Things that go along with the setting are perfectly reasonable to be there. Like, Jesus. Yes.
And less focused on its Jewish roots. Placing the Gospel of Matthew after 70 AD, when Christians were disconnecting from their Jewish roots, seems to be out of place. It makes more sense to place it among the first generation of Christians and before 70 AD. So various elements in Matthew suggest...
I got to take that on. Separating from their Jewish roots would make perfectly good sense after the Jewish War as well. And in fact, it would make more sense. Because after the Jewish War, the Jews have become pariahs in the Roman Empire. Like, nobody wants to be associated with them, because then you're guilty by association and so on and so forth, and the Roman Empire comes after you. So all the Gospels, most of the Gospels at least, start to do two things. they start to paint the Jewish leadership as the bad guys, which you want to do if you're still living in a Roman Empire, and you're starting to kiss ass to the Romans. That's why all the Gospels portray Pilate as a good guy, even though Josephus, who's a Jew, says he was an asshole. Okay, Mike doesn't seem to be able to see that this is also possible for a later dating as well. Sorry, but if you're trying to get your religion to be left alone in the Roman Empire, you start kissing up to the Romans. And it makes perfect sense. Like Pilate, like John goes overboard with fucking Pilate. Like John, yeah, he's like, I don't know how Mike Jones can't see that this fits much better after the destruction of Jerusalem, because then nobody wants to be associated with the Jews anymore or have been seen to be their supporters, because then you become the next Roman target. So the Christians, the Gentile Christians in particular, are going, hey, man, we have our own faith. We're going to distance ourselves from this Jewish religion, and they're going to reflect that in their Gospels that they're writing. Like Matthew, even as a Jew, is like, well, yeah, like he's like, yeah, the Jewish leaders were kind of a pain in the ass. It's like, and Luke certainly does that. John overdoes that theme. Mark is kind of there because he's during the Jewish revolt. Like the Christians are wanting to distance themselves from their Jewish heritage because they don't want to go down with the ship, so to speak. And so I don't understand how you can't see that that's also a viable alternative. But then again, I'm not an apologist.
It aligns with a date prior to the Jewish War, not during or after. Next, an important theme in the Synoptics and Acts indicates they were written in a time before Roman persecution. According to both Suetonius and Tacitus, Christians were persecuted under the Roman Emperor Nero, which began in 64 AD. The book of Revelation is...
Okay, that's very misleading way to put it, like that it began at that point and continued. Like Christians were automatically, from the time of Nero, were automatically persecuted from then on. That is very, very overblown. Like during the time of Nero, but after Nero died, did it continue is a good question. I don't think he wants to see that. So, yeah, like some of those Christians were Jews, yes. And the Jews were coming under fire, at about the same time because they were starting a freaking war with Rome. Like, and they were seen as part of a Jewish sect. So it's like, of course, the Christians were being persecuted at the time when they're associated with the Jews, which is why the gospel writers after the Jewish war over, Matthew, Luke, and especially John, start to distance themselves. It's the Jewish leadership's fault. We weren't a part of that. Okay, it makes absolute sense from a political point of view for the gospel writers to suddenly kiss up to the Romans like Pilate's this really good guy that wanted Jesus to go. Let him go. He has this, and John has him have this long conversation where Pilate is put in a very positive light. Okay, and the Jewish leadership is put in a negative. That makes really damn good sense after 70 AD. It makes great sense. And Mike can't see it. Like he wants to say, oh, they were being persecuted. Well, yeah, because they were connected with Jewish people. And then the Gentile Christians said, hey, man, we just like the faith. We don't necessarily like the Jews. Like that seems to be what's happening to me, at least in all the stuff I've read. But I can absolutely see the gospel writers saying, yes, we're going against the Jewish leadership because they're the problem. They were the problem. That's what led to the revolt. That's what led to the destruction. It was the Jewish leadership. It was the Jewish religious leadership. It's a perfect scapegoat in a Roman world that had just fought a war with the Jews, like a civil war. Like, come on.
Critical of Rome, referring to it as a beast, while mentioning...
Elizabeth, I don't know. Nobody knows where that conversation comes from because it's very... If we take Josephus's idea of Pilate's character into account, it's very un-Pilate-like. Okay, so I would argue that I think John made it up, or the Johannine community. It was a story floating around them. Like, if you take the views that gospels are created by communities, which is the view I take, yeah, it's very likely that they either made it up to kind of explain something, or somebody who told a story, or because you need to understand in such communities, oh, we got this problem, and somebody joins the community and just adds a story to the growing lexicon of stories, and they make up the story about Jesus interviewing with Pilate, when the other gospels say this was, like Matthew says, he didn't say a word, which was to fulfill the scripture. Well, all of a sudden, John has him having this long discourse. Like, why? So yeah, I think it could be made up. Oh yeah, but the Gospels make Pilate look like a saint, like he's Saint Pilate. Like, he recognized Jesus was the Messiah. Like, he recognized that shit.
Christian persecution, which indicates it was written after or during a period of Roman persecution. But in the Synoptics and Acts, we see a friendlier attitude towards Roman authority figures. A centurion,
which absolutely makes sense after the Jewish war. If the Gentile Christians are trying to break away, and Jewish Christians that didn't want to have anything to do it, it makes sense there too. It doesn't just make sense before, it also makes sense after. So, yes. Yeah, he was a pagan. Yeah, Pilate being nice is anti-Jewish. The idea is that Jesus was thinking king when he clearly never was. Yes, like it's that there are a multitude of problems with John and his portrayal of Pilate that we really think that it's like a made-up story. Like, it's because the synoptics don't present Pilate that way at all. The one thing that's in common, though, is Pilate suddenly becomes the good guy. A Roman governor becomes the good guy. That, yeah, like Pilate shouldn't even be there. Like, there's a problem there, like, yes.
centurion is said to have more faith than anyone in Israel. Pilate finds no guilt in Jesus and wants to set him free. A Roman soldier rescues Paul from dying at the hands of the Jews, and another treats Paul kindly. Mark said a Roman centurion was one of the few at the cross who understood Jesus was who he claimed to be.
Which makes all of this makes perfect sense if you're trying to kiss ass to the Romans and distance yourself from the Jewish people and become your own religion because of the Jewish revolt. All of this makes sense completely after the fact. Okay, after this also makes sense. If I'm a group of people that's associated with the Jews after the Jewish revolt has failed and the Romans have put that down, destroyed the city, and besieged the city, burned down the temple, if I'm trying to be a group of people that says, hey, and I don't want to go down with the Jews, I'm a Christian, then yeah, I'm going to start writing gospels that kind of indicate that. I'm going to start writing literature about the Acts indicating that. Like, yeah, we're really down with the Roman Empire. Okay. We Christians are good, law-abiding Roman citizens. We're not like those Jews that revolted against you. It makes perfect sense here too.
Rome is never considered a direct enemy or threat in the Gospels and Acts. The focus is more on the Jewish sects, who were opposing the church long before Rome started. Additionally, in John, which was likely written after 70 AD, we see a lack of passages painting Romans in a positive light, which we would expect if the Christians no longer wished to portray Roman authority.
Oh yeah, that's straight up a lie. Has he ever read John? Because I memorized good chunks of it. I don't know where he gets the idea that Romans aren't put in a positive light in John. Pilate practically has his Roman ass kissed so much that it gets wet. Come on. Like, when you look at the dialogue between Jesus and Pilate and John, Jesus has no gripes with Pilate at all. Pilate is almost presented as a guy that actually wants to let Jesus go. He wants to get him out of there. There's still the antagonism with the Jews and the Jewish leadership. I don't see this, and I don't know what Bible Mike Jones is reading, but he needs to go read John again, because there really isn't this antagonism between the Romans and the Christians. Okay, like the Christians are like, yeah, we're not there. So it's from Scotland. Okay, there we go. I suppose it's possible.
Authority figure as well. The theme throughout the synoptics also indicates they fit with a time prior to 64 AD. Finally,
they also fit with the timeline after, and when you consider their interrelationship with each other, it actually better fits 70 AD and later. But yeah, sorry, Mike. I don't think your evidence is as ironclad as you think it is.
Jonathan Bernier and John A.T. Robinson have pointed out Acts has an enigmatic ending. Several chapters are spent building up for Paul to head to Rome and face trial, where he can present the gospel to Caesar and his court. But Acts ends with Paul arriving in Rome on the statement he lived there 2 whole years at his own expense.
Okay, what's going to follow? Okay, this is the argument that Luke and Acts are a duo written by the same author. And so the argument here is because Acts ends with Paul in Rome the first time, that's where they were. Like that's so, this is right before Paul gets executed or tried, released, then tried again, and then executed. So that's where the timeline ends, and that's why the book ends there. I heard this when I was in Bible college. I think I heard it in seminary as well. One of the professors there talked about how the reason Acts ends there is because that's what they knew at the time, and that's what the writer knew at the time, and that's where they were, The problem with this is there's a couple of alternative explanations. One is simply mechanical. The writer ran out of scroll room. When you look at the length of Luke and Acts, if they are a dual, they're very similar. Could have ran out of room. But more likely, when you look at the story, the Acts of the Apostles, it starts with go and preach the gospel in Judea, Samaria, and the uttermost parts of the earth. All the book of Acts is a chronicle of how that happened. So once Paul reaches Rome, the story's over. Like that part of the story is over. And who knows, maybe the writer of Acts and Luke wanted to do a sequel, and they just stopped at that point because they just ran out of room. This notion that we have to date it here in the 60s because the writer of Acts stops at this point because that's where they were, that's assuming a bit. So yeah, or they died. Like it's like they didn't get a chance to finish it because he died. Like that's the other possibility. There's a bunch of them, Elizabeth. Like there's his idea that this has to be dated at this point because this is where they were. That's only one option of many. And once again, Mike can't see the options. So, man, I can't remember if there are some historians. Paul's death is Paul and Peter's death are well attested, but there are some scholars that argue they're apocryphal. I just can't remember the sources at the moment. Yeah, like they could have just died right then, or maybe the writer of Luke Acts never got a chance to go back to his work to continue it because they got killed. Okay, like they were, they got killed, or they could have lost their materials to write. Like there's a whole ton of circumstantial stuff that can happen to get this. But this is what Mike is arguing for. He's arguing that the writing of Acts stopped where they knew. Well, that's conjecture because there's alternative explanations.
There's no mention of his trial or if he was released. The climactic buildup just ends without a payoff. Paul most likely arrived in Rome in 60 AD. Acts mentions a change in governors of Felix to Festus, which happened that year. Acts records it was Festus that sent Paul for his trial in Rome after he became governor. So if Acts ends with Paul still waiting in Rome for trial, that is probably when Acts was completed and sent off.
It doesn't follow that that's the case. Like perhaps he went to trial and got killed, and his companions got killed, and so they ended the book, and there you go. I mean, that still puts it early, but it doesn't prove anything. But you could also have this written later, because you can have that's where the story ends. They went to Judea and preached the gospel there. They went to Samaria, preached the gospel there. Then Paul takes it to the uttermost parts of the earth. And so the story ends because they arrived in Rome. The arrival in Rome is the climax of the story that started at the beginning in chapter 1. Go preach this message to the uttermost parts of the earth. And the uttermost parts of the earth could be considered Rome. So it's like it fits the narrative discussion, and it's just the Acts of the Apostles. Like there's different things that they did. Why do we need a climax to that? Like the climax is the arrival in Rome. They got there. They achieved the objective. Okay. Everything else is there. So the writer ends with that, doesn't need to write anymore. There's so many reasons why he ended there. And this whole, it's all kind of a, here, let me, well, I don't want to do that yet. No, but it's, I don't know. He's speculating. Yeah, he's very much speculating. So yeah, like it's that. Like it's speculation. He doesn't know this for sure.
Otherwise, why would Luke build up to this climactic trial, only to leave his readers guessing if Paul was released or not?
Or he just wanted to show the reasons why Paul was sent to Rome, which seems to be a big theme of the book of Acts. Like, he wouldn't have, I would have let him go if he hadn't appealed to Caesar. Now I have to send him to Rome. So it's like time limitations too. Like it's like time limitations, space on the scroll. Like there's so many reasons why it could end there. And who knows, maybe the writer was planning on doing what happened after that in another book that could also take place after 70 AD. Like he just never got to finish what he wanted to do. Like if you do take Luke and Acts as a stool, maybe it was supposed to be a trio and the writer just never got to that part. And it ended there because there was supposed to be, okay, this is what happened to Paul in Rome. And there was supposed to be a whole bunch of other shit, but it never got written down because the guy died. And, he was writing in, 80, 90 AD and he just didn't get to finish the job. Like it's a perfectly reasonable explanation. Like it doesn't have to be that this is where they were. That's where they stopped. Like, nope. And it's not really helpful for dating.
This argument made by Bernier and Robinson goes back to Adolf von Harnack, who originally dated Acts to the 90s, but revised his date after considering this point.
And I would say Harnack was wrong to do that, by the way. And here we go with some more quote money.
The quote,
so
the more clearly we see that the trial of St. Paul, and above all his appeal to Caesar, is the chief subject of the last quarter of Acts, the more hopeless does it appear that we can explain why the narrative breaks off as it does, otherwise than by assuming that the trial had actually not yet reached its close. It is no use to struggle against this conclusion. If St.
No, it doesn't indicate that at all. It just indicates that's where the writer stopped. We don't know that the writer didn't have intentions on continuing the story on another scroll, which is a very real possibility, and that puts it in any time frame. This notion that somehow this is the only explanation, that just doesn't fit. It doesn't fit. Sorry, Mike.
Luke, in the year 80, 90, or 100, wrote thus: he was not simply a blundering, but an absolute incomprehensible historian.
Nope. Disagree.
In other words, it makes no sense to document the journey of Paul, foreshadow a trial before Caesar, and not pay it off, and then exclude Paul's release and subsequent death. Despite what others have said,
unless you were still planning on writing more of the story on a different scroll and you just never got to it. Sorry, there's alternative explanations, and that's my only point. And it's not this inescapable conclusion as Mike seems to think it is.
Merely arriving in Rome is not a fitting end, since not everything has been answered that was foreshadowed, and it does not result in a climax of Paul bringing the gospel to Rome. Luke notes other Christians already.
In short, here we go. I got to bring it out because I think it's appropriate. Earl did this a long time for Habermas, and I've been dying to use it. For this one too, as well. Here we go. In other words, the reason why we think the book of Acts ended where it does is vibes. It doesn't read well. It doesn't do well. So it's vibes. Our vibe is that it shouldn't end here. The book of Acts shouldn't end here. That's our vibes. Okay. Like that's exactly what his argument is. And I'm like, you could have, your author could have reached a point where he couldn't write anymore on that particular and never got to the rest of it because he died or something distracted him or he just never got to it for multiple reasons. And he could be writing in 80 AD when doing that. You don't know that the book of Acts is the final thing. You can't prove that. And until you do that, like my theory has always been, I think he ended the story at a good point where then it sets up another story, but he never got a chance to write it. And for whatever reasons. So, but there you go. It's vibes. Basically, his reason is I don't like the vibes of the end of Acts, so it must be that's where they were, and they must be dated in the 60s, therefore. So, yeah, cliffhanger. There you go. Could be a cliffhanger. Exactly. So, yeah, or he ran out of paper. He needed that last part for his scroll to the outhouse. So, yeah, God blessed its leadership. Why would Rome hate Paul so much? Yeah, like he ends up going back to Rome. According to tradition, Paul ends up going to Spain and then coming back. So before he's actually killed. So there you go.
Resided there. So Paul merely arriving in Rome results in nothing spectacular.
Other than a great cliffhanger or a great moment to drive a sequel from.
Paul most likely died in the mid-60s. If Acts was written decades later, or even a few years later, it would make no sense to conclude here without detailing the last bits of Paul's life.
Except if this is the first arrival. We have several years. Like, what if the writer of Acts, and this is pure speculation on my part, but it just points out that Mike Jones's speculation isn't much better. What if the next chapter was Paul's journey to Spain after he gets exonerated by the Roman Emperor who lets him go? So then he travels to Spain and comes back, gets rearrested again. And then, like, there's a whole bunch of stories you could tell there. So the idea, like you're talking from 64, that's 4 years of stories that you could tell with another volume. What if, just what if, this was supposed to be a 3-volume set and not a 2-one? I'm sorry, you can't make the ultimate conclusion that this was done in 64 AD. That's because that's where it was, and that's where you have to date Acts, and Luke has to be in front of that, and Mark has to be in front of that, because we all acknowledge that. Like, this does not follow. Like, so have a good one, Martin. Should never mention relevant documents. No, he shouldn't, really. He really shouldn't. Yes, a lot can happen in 4 years, is my point. And what if the writer who's writing in 80 AD is like, I got all these other stories of Paul from the first time he arrives in Rome, when he goes to Spain, he does some evangelism here, comes back to Rome. That's when he gets arrested by Nero, beheaded, and all that stuff. There's a whole bunch of stories to write there. And you could have a whole nother thing of vellum of stories about Paul, but he never got to it. It's perfectly reasonable that that's just as good an assumption as what Mike's giving us here. So,
thus, given this strange ending, it seems the only reason Acts does not mention the trial is because the trial had not occurred when Acts was finished.
That doesn't
Which
follow.
means the book was roughly completed 62 to 63 AD.
But
this also means the Gospel of Luke would have been completed prior to this, and since Mark was a source for Luke, that means Mark was also written prior to this as well. The enigmatic ending brings the audience right up to the present time of the author and helps us to see when it was finished.
No, it does not necessarily.
As Jonathan Bernier says, Harnack's argument is not from silence. Rather, it is an argument from presence. Indeed, the presence.
It is our argument from silence, because he doesn't know what the intentions of the author of Luke Acts were after he finished. It is very possible that what I said is also true, which he was intending to write more of Paul's works on, and he had come to the end of it and ended his volume there, and was going to do a volume 3. But he, for whatever reason, never got to it. It is quite possible that whoever wrote Luke, Acts, if there are a duo, though that has questions by some recent scholarship, if that's true, sorry, once again, it is very possible that the writer of Luke and Acts intended to write another volume. And that pushes it. You don't know why he ended it there. So I don't understand. Yeah, like, why is it so difficult for you to understand that this is, yeah, that's your opinion. Like, why is it so difficult for him to understand that there are alternatives?
Of an extended 8 chapters discussion of Paul's legal challenges, and an ending that leaves said challenges unresolved. And Harnack makes a strong case.
What all this does is brings up the possibility of what I said also being true, which is you're acknowledging that he could do 8 more chapters. I can acknowledge that he could have done a whole nother frickin' book. Like,
it's frankly difficult to either disagree with or improve his argument. Either Acts was completed ca 62, when the Acts narrative ends with Paul in Rome, or Luke's aim in these last chapters remains opaque. Now, James Crossley notes that some arguments have been put forward to explain the ending of Acts and to preserve the late dating. First, Paul's death might be hinted to in Acts 20:25 in verse 38. There is also no mention of the death of James, which Josephus recorded, so maybe Luke didn't want to record how the apostles died. Luke also doesn't mention the earlier Caligula crisis, so maybe Luke just omitted certain events for unknown reasons. The persecution of Christians in Rome may not have been mentioned because Luke's story simply had not got that far chronologically.
All of these are incredibly valid points. I just want to point that out now.
Crossley does note none of these arguments are decisive, and if we evaluate them further, we can see they're riddled with problems. First, there is no evidence Luke was intending to write a 3rd volume and continue the story.
How do you know that? How do you know that? Once again, how do you know that? Like, I'm sorry, I know you're probably going to try to explain it here, but I want to know how you know that.
Bernier says, such arguments are ad hoc, in the worst possible sense.
Okay, so you're going to attack the argument and not give me any evidence from the text that Luke was not intending to write a 3rd volume. Once again, how do you know what the intentions of the author were when we don't know who the hell the author is?
For our purposes, they can be dismissed as little more than speculation.
You know what else? You know what else is speculation? That the idea that we ended here because this is what they knew and this is when it should be dated. That's all speculative too.
It is a stretch to say Paul's death is hinted to in Acts 20. Paul is merely telling the Ephesians they will not see him again because he has to go to Jerusalem and will likely face opposition and persecution.
Okay, he uses much stronger language than what you're indicating. You will not see my face again is pretty straightforward. You are never going to see me again. To weaken that, that's just dishonest.
Given Paul's experience with persecution from Jewish authorities, this is like entering the lion's den. It is a valid inference for Paul to expect a bad ending and to say a final farewell to the Ephesians. However, Paul does not state that he will die, let alone in Rome. Bernier says, Paul does not state here that he expects to die. Moreover, he states explicitly that he does not know what fate awaits him. Explicit denial of knowing his own fate does not sit easily with the hypothesis.
Okay, how does that jibe with you will not see my face again? You don't seem to mention what he actually says, and I think that's on purpose. Like, he says, you will not see my face again, indicating his death at that point. If that's the case, then it's very possible that the writer of Acts wrote well after the fact, just relaying the story, because he's already indicated, yeah, we all know that Paul is going to die. So it actually might be an indication that we should expect a 3rd volume. Like, I'm sorry, you still haven't told me why I shouldn't expect the writer of Luke to have written on in another volume. Like, why shouldn't that have happened?
That he is predicting said fate. Furthermore, it's logical for Paul to infer he won't be back to Asia Minor, given that he planned to go to Jerusalem, Rome, and then Spain. Given that Paul had big plans to take the gospel elsewhere, it makes sense he did not expect to return to Asia Minor.
It's also expected that, yeah, sure, he might, but he's very, very definitive in his language. So, sorry, Mike, not sold yet.
Also, if Luke was speaking of Paul's death, why not include that in the narrative at the end of Acts? Why only hint to it in the most subtle way and not
You will not see my face again as a subtle way? Why, okay, Mike, why didn't you say what the phrase was? Because it would absolutely contradict your framing here, and that pisses me off. This is very apologetics here, where you're emphasizing, oh, he does it in the very moment. You will not see my face again is not freaking subtle. I don't know what on planet that is subtle to you, but it's not subtle to me.
include the climactic event at the end to pay off this alleged foreshadowing. The next issue is resolved when we realize that James was most likely martyred in 62 AD, which means it would have happened after Luke finished Acts or was finishing it up, and the news may not have arrived in Rome right away. In fact, this might also point to Acts being written before James was martyred, since that was also left out.
Might, maybe, but it also might indicate that the writer of Acts just didn't record everything. What a shock.
Last, the reason Luke doesn't mention the Caligula crisis is because it did not directly affect the mission of the church. Acts is specifically a history of the...
Which also means then, if it didn't affect the history of the church, that doesn't prove authorship 62 AD any more than it proves 80 AD. Like, if that's the case, then you've openly admitted then that the writer of Acts leaves stuff out. That if it's only relevant to the growth of the church, well, then that can be written at any time.
Acts of the Apostles. Crossley says the Caligula crisis refers to the time the Emperor Caligula attempted to erect his statue in the Jewish temple. This did not directly affect the church or the apostles, so it's irrelevant for the purpose of the book of Acts. Thus, given this, the enigmatic ending still points to the idea that Luke and Acts were completed around 62. And this also...
It does not do that. It just, that's your opinion. I can also argue from some of the stuff that you said that it's later too.
suggests Mark had to be completed prior to this. Now, some object and argue we have good reasons to date Acts much later.
Good question. This is one of the greatest weaknesses in apologetics. This is why we're talking about Acts is like talking about Homer. Okay, it's like talking about the Iliad or the Odyssey. Like there's a lot of, when you read Acts and you read the Odyssey, there's a lot of similarities, and it really makes it look like Acts is kind of made up. So if it was a work of fiction, then you can absolutely see why they ended there and the guy was expecting to write more. But Mike can't see that because he has to maintain apologetics. So the apostles teleports in and premise magic stuff going. Oh yeah. Yeah. Like I think Philip, one of the deacons teleports. Yes.
Steve Mason and Richard Purvo have argued Luke relied on the works of Josephus, which means the earliest Acts could have been written is the late 90s AD. Mason suggests key passages in Acts show signs of borrowed vocabulary that is found within Josephus, and so Acts could not have been written prior. But this is unlikely for several reasons.
Just so everybody knows, this is a theorem by a couple of scholars that push the writing of the book of Acts and Luke and the Gospels back a little farther. It's not the only one, and it's not necessary to maintain a late authorship of the book of Acts, as good scholars, I think, do.
Carl Armstrong notes similar vocabulary between Acts and Josephus is not enough to suggest literary dependence, as it is also possible they both used a common source. And this is in fact what most scholars believe when it comes to the similarities between Josephus and Luke. Armstrong also notes that in the passages where Josephus and Acts intersect, they often contradict each other. If Luke was relying on Josephus, this would have been unlikely.
Why is that unlikely? Because we know, like, Matthew corrected Mark, and so those are contradictions too. Like, Mark gets the geography of some places wrong and how you travel between them, and Matthew corrects it. Matthew corrects some of his pronunciations of stuff too. So just because there's differences between the two texts doesn't mean one didn't rely on the other. You can change the story. Like, come on. The story about the rich man and providing the tomb for Jesus gets changed several times. Like, it comes up in one of the Gospels, gets added to in another, and gets added to in John. Like, the idea that the stories change or get changed by different authors, it just doesn't follow.
Purvo and Mason claim Acts 5:36-37 is dependent on Antiquities Book 20, because both mention the revolt of Theudas. And the argument is Luke followed Josephus' order. But Luke and Josephus date the revolt to different time periods. Luke places it before Herod the Great's death, and Josephus places it in the 40s. I. Howard Marshall and Colin Hemmer noted it is plausible that Josephus is the one who misstated the rebellion, or Luke is referring to an earlier rebellion and a different Theudas. There is therefore much to be said for the suggestion either that Josephus got his dating wrong, or more probably, that Gamaliel is referring to another, otherwise unknown Theudas, since there were innumerable uprisings when Herod the Great died.
Or Luke got it wrong.
Since Josephus describes 4 men bearing the name of Simon within 40 years. Revolutionary thinking was common in the periods leading up to the Jewish War. So there very well may have been 2 revolts where the leader had the same name. Even if this is wrong and Luke made the error, it is unlikely he was relying on Josephus. Luke and Josephus listed different amounts of followers. Luke says there were about 400, and Josephus says the majority of the masses followed him. If Luke was...
That's not different numbers. That's one with a specific number and one with a general hand-waving, this is how many people there were.
Following Josephus, he would have been more careful to follow what Josephus said, and research does indicate Luke was fairly accurate.
Be careful about what?
in following his own sources. Luke's account is also much shorter, and so it is odd for Purvo to suggest Luke copied from Josephus in one place, where he clearly contradicts Josephus on important details.
Hold on. Why is it not possible that Luke copied from Josephus and just summarized what Josephus said in his extended account? Are we not allowing ancient authors to do shorter accounts of longer things? Is that what we're doing here? Like, why would that be a problem? Like, why Luke actually could copy something and summarize it, couldn't he? I don't understand that one. I don't understand how that's a contradiction. Like, it doesn't follow.
Furthermore, Armstrong notes there are other details that make it unlikely that Luke used Josephus. It seems rather negligent of Luke to avoid the tantalizing detail of Theudas as a certain impostor by Josephus, given his proclivity to denounce sorcery throughout Acts. Surely Luke would not have missed...
Rebellion and sorcery are very different things. So I don't know what the connection is there, but...
this aspect of Josephus's account of Theudas. Also, if we follow the transcriptional canon, that the more difficult reading is to be preferred, the Acts account is more likely to be earlier, given the possible anachronism of Theudas and Judas. Since the Acts account is unquestionably brief, as compared to Josephus's, the shorter reading is to be preferred.
I don't know why that would be, because you can also have a shorter reading being a summary of somebody else's work. That doesn't necessarily follow that the shorter reading is the first one and people just keep adding to it. There could be times when a reading could be shortened. So the writer of Luke just picks out the point that he wants and leaves the rest. He doesn't have to copy everything word for word to be later.
Given Luke's interest in rulers and political details in Acts, it seems rather negligent that he would skip over the note when Theudas was procurator of Judea.
Well, it's also rather negligent of a lot of the gospel writers to miss certain details that would be important to establishing the historicity of Jesus too, but they do.
Another place Purvo claims Luke is relying on Josephus is in Acts 21. But Luke's mention of the Egyptian is merely a footnote compared to Josephus's extended account. Given his style, if Luke was copying Josephus, he would surely have included more details.
Why would he do that? Like, that's an assumption on your part. Like, if he's trying to save space because he knows he's got limited space, and all he had, like, you can have this big detailed account of a historical event, but if you're writing something and you just want to kind of quickly summarize it in a sentence or two so people know what you're talking about, I don't understand why writers always have to embellish more and more and more. Like, why can't writers in the ancient world also summarize other people's work? Like, it goes both ways when you're writing. So I don't understand why Mike Jones thinks it can only be one way, or these scholars think it can only be one way.
And like with the prior example, both Josephus and Luke differ on the number of followers, and also Luke employs a different preposition. Similar issues.
You do realize this happens in the Bible a lot, where numbers change and different writers use different numbers. Like, that happens, I believe, in the Gospels as well. So you might want to think about that.
Can be found in other places where it is claimed that Luke relied on Josephus. In fact, the scholarly consensus is that Luke and Josephus probably relied on similar sources, rather than one copying the other. As Gary Goldberg said regarding another alleged point of contact, Josephus and Luke may have used similar or identical sources in composing their passages. This explanation appears to be the simplest. Thus, there is no reason to assume Luke was dependent on Josephus, and all the evidence points to Acts.
You said no, and I disagree with there is no reason. You can say that's a very improper way to put what you just presented. What you should have said there is not that there's no reason, but there's alternative reasons not to accept this argument, that the argument still stands and your argument still stands, and it seems to be a point of contention between scholars as to whether Luke and Acts used Josephus or whatever, and there's arguments to be made on both sides. But to sit there and suddenly say there's no reason to accept that, I don't know that you made that case as strong as you think you did. And once again, that's apologetics speaking and not good scholarship. A good scholar would have said at that point, we have arguments on both sides of this issue. You can take it whichever way you want. But maybe Acts used Josephus, maybe they didn't. But it doesn't really matter for the rest of our discussion on dating, because that doesn't help us. Okay, like, I can still make the book of Acts at 95 AD without this argument about Josephus. I can still do that. So, yeah, just check his references. Copy Joseph. Just check his references, yes.
Being completed by 62. Given this, we can create some tentative dates. Given that Paul...
Okay, this is a good question. What is the sample size of the scholarly consensus on that particular issue? You have two scholars that are prominent arguing that Acts used Josephus, and you have a couple other scholars arguing against them. What the rest of the scholarly consensus is, I have no idea. And I don't think anybody else does. Like, I don't think that's something that's been established. What there is like a small scholarly side argument about whether Acts uses Josephus, and there are very few scholars involved on each side, is the impression that I get so far. Now, I could be wrong about that. I want to make that very stated. Like, other people in the scholarly field might be taking one side or the other as well, but I just don't have any information other than what he presented, that we got these two scholars arguing that Acts used Josephus, so that puts it back in the 90s. And then we have others saying, oh, that doesn't make any sense for this, and this reason. Neither one of them have definitive evidence that would say 99% one way or the other. It very much is a 50-50 thing to me. And that's my analysis so far. Doesn't mean I won't read something else later, Dragon Rider, and change my mind on it. But I don't know what he doesn't talk about scholarly consensus, probably because there isn't one.
Paul's longest letters do not quote the Gospels, and only seem to refer to the Jesus tradition in oral form. The Synoptic Gospels and Acts likely came after them. Luke and Acts were likely written between 61 and 63 AD. Since Luke was relying on Mark,
notice right there, he assumes that he's won the argument, that it's written 62 to 63. Mike assumes he's won that argument. This is what happens throughout this entire video series so far, and his longer video. Every time he assumes that, yeah, I've proven my point, so now I can run with that assumption. And he hasn't really proven that the previous point, so he really can't run with that assumption.
Mark would have had to come first. One church tradition says Mark wrote the preaching of Peter while they were in Rome. Claudius expelled the Jews from Rome during his reign, so Peter could not have been in Rome for between 49 AD and 54 AD. So we can tentatively date Mark to 57 to 60 AD, which would chronologically fit with Luke arriving shortly after with Paul and him opening his gospel by referring to others who have written accounts. Since the consensus is that Matthew also relied on Mark, but the evidence still suggests Matthew dates prior to the destruction of the temple and the first Roman persecution.
Consensus is that Matthew or Luke relied on Mark. Consensus. They both literally copy Mark word for word. That's not a reliance. That's a quotation. What the hell are you talking about? Like, dude, it is so obvious that Matthew and Luke quote from Mark. It's like literally word for frickin' word for most of it, except where Matthew and Luke either correct or reorder things a little bit differently in Mark. But they quote the guy word for word. That's not a consensus. That's just an observation. Ugh.
We could tentatively date Matthew to the period of 59 to 64 AD. Some suggest Luke was aware of both Mark and Matthew, but we cannot be sure of this. This would also fit with the idea that as many of the disciples were aging, the church would have likely realized the need to...
Matthew was only aware of Mark and Luke? Is that what he fucking said?
So relied on Mark, but the evidence still suggests Matthew dates prior to the destruction of the temple and the first Roman persecution. We could tentatively date Matthew to the period of 59 to 64 AD. Some suggest Luke was aware of both Mark and Matthew.
Some suggest Luke quotes Mark word for a good chunk of his gospel. Suggests is not a word I would use. I'm not trying to be rude, but even conservative Christian scholars recognize the fact that Luke and Matthew basically quote Mark for a good chunk of their gospels. This idea that they sort of kind of maybe used it, that's bullshit. Ugh. I know why he wants to do this, because what apologists have been trying to do lately is try to say that all these gospels aren't dependent on each other. Okay? That's what they're trying to do. And I can kind of see the buildup for that case right here. The problem with that is when you quote somebody, it doesn't make you a second and third witness. It makes you in collusion with each other. Like you have a colluded testimony, which is, we reject that a lot of times in courts of law because it's colluded. And sorry, all these gospels are absolutely dependent on each other. Even John is dependent on the other three. So, hey, Robert, good to see you. We're having fun with Mike Jones tonight. And so far he's batting 0. I don't think, have I said that he's made a good point yet tonight? I don't remember, chat. I don't think I have.
But we cannot be sure of this. This would also fit with the idea.
We cannot be sure of the fact that a guy got quoted word for word exact. You know, I said earlier that, you should really watch your language when you talk about scholarship, because a lot of things are probabilistic. There's one thing we do damn well know for sure. That Mark straight up got copied twice by Matthew and Luke. The idea that somehow maybe that's a nebulous idea, that just isn't true. They literally are word for each other. That's collusion. Yeah, I kind of figured. I haven't seen you around, but yeah, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your vacation. So, yeah, you and me both, man. Like, Mike is like literally suggesting they're way that early. There just isn't any way that that's true. There's too many internal things that push it back. And the idea that somehow maybe Luke, Matthew, and Mark sort of kind of knew each other, maybe they used each other, that is just such a load of shit. Okay, that's a pile of steaming doo-doo, because it is pretty clear somebody copied somebody. Like, even if you take that Matthew wrote first, then Mark, then Luke, somebody's copying somebody, because a large part of these gospels are, this is the synoptic problem, is that they copy each other. And thus are they being so I'm so, I'm so sorry, Earl. But yeah, I'm feeling the same way, Earl. Like, really, dude. Like, you do know that consensus and scholarship, right? This is the synoptic problem, that these guys copied from somebody. One person is the original and the other are copies. The best bet is Mark is the original and Matthew and Luke are copying him for a good chunk of their gospels. That's collusion. That's intradependence. These are not dependent sources. The whole point of the synoptic problem is they are not independent sources. This is cricket being thrown out for a zero on one ball. Okay. I don't know cricket, but it sounds real. Yeah, he's not doing very well, because he's not, at this point, he's not even just contradicting like skeptics. He's contradicting Christian scholarship on the subject too. Like, there's just no way. There's no way that this is true.
That as many of the disciples were aging, the church would have likely realized the need to have the gospel written down, so it was preserved for future generations. The common practice of a rabbi was to obtain disciples younger than him, so the disciples were likely in their 20s when Jesus was on earth. 30 years later, they would be in their 50s and would be approaching the point when the average male from that time would pass away. So it makes sense this is the time when the gospel accounts were written down so future generations could retain them.
Or because they were an apocalyptic movement and thought that God was going to raise everybody from the dead by one generation, which many of their gospels indicate, they didn't give a shit, and people wrote all this stuff later based on the stories that they told, because they were shifting stuff. That's also a viable option. Like, you don't have to have the disciples doing this. You just have to, we heard all these stories from the disciples. We heard all these stories from all these Christians. Let's collect them now that the temple's been destroyed and we have to distance ourselves from the Jews and connect ourselves more with Rome. Let's write all these stories down, preserve them for future generations, and rebrand the movement to keep Christianity going. That's also a possibility.
Thus, given the evidence, we can infer the Gospels likely date to the late 50s to the early 60s.
Given the non-evidence, you mean? Because you haven't really given any evidence. You've given me a lot of conjecture, which can also be countered, and we can do other conjecture.
Paul's longest letters were completed, but before the Jewish War began. And given this, the church tradition that they came from their attributed authors seems legitimate, since they would not date to later periods when many of the eyewitnesses and disciples would have passed on. The Gospels chronologically fit with the period when the first generation of Christians were still in existence, and when the eyewitnesses were still preaching.
Or they fit with a movement that wanted to preserve their stories, that they realized that things weren't intentionally this way. They were moving from an apocalyptic movement, thinking the end of the world was coming, and so they didn't really feel the need to write anything down. And so after the destruction of the temple, when the whole eschatology has to be reframed, we're going to write down these gospels and reframe them. Yes. Where's the Roman documents? Yes. Brent, you make the most valid point. Like, where is the authenticity from other documents for the gospels? It's a problem. It's a problem. All that for that it makes sense that this is what the gospel is written down. Sitting through all that ramble, just finally reached the point where he states it would make sense. It would make sense. You know what else? A lot of other things make sense too. And this is the problem with the whole gospel fight, is you can get alternative opinions. And Mike speaks very confidently about this, and he should be more reserved in his language. but he's an apologist, and apologists can't live on some sort of definitive, this is the way it is. This is the way it is. Like, this is just, he's done all of this. Like, you're right. He's done all of this just to get to this point. Well, this seems to make sense to me. Mike, it doesn't make sense to me, because it's not the only way you could look at it. You could also look at it as a movement that was very apocalyptic, because when you talk about Paul, you don't mention the fact that half of Paul's writings are probably authentic and the other half are not. They're pseudo-Paul. They're forgeries, which is even indicated in one of the forgeries. Like, you don't deal with the possibilities very well. The biggest problem I've had so far watching through the series, and I've jumped from 1 to 6 here, and I've been watching the video because I'm getting ready to do my own series of videos responding to all this, because I think it's necessary, because unfortunately IP is way too popular in apologists not to counter, even though what he's doing is obviously, I think you can see the bullshit. Yeah, Robert, it's a good analogy. I mean, maybe All I Want for Christmas, My Two Friends, maybe have copied a little bit from Yellow Submarine Song, perhaps, just a little. Yeah, like, you're getting the point here. This is what IP has been doing this, but IP, a lot of people listen to him, and a lot of people think that he's got it down. And the fact of the matter is, he has a manufactured authority. He's only got a degree in philosophy, and he's obviously very new to the field of studying the Bible. And I'll let Kip Davis and Digital Hammurabi take him on the other side of things, right? On the Old Testament side. But when it comes to the New Testament and the Gospels, he's out to lunch, because he's so focused on coming to his conclusion that he doesn't really present the opposition of why they're dated late strongly. And even Christian scholars are like, yeah, these were written later. Like, you don't have to be a super critic and not believe in the religion to also agree that maybe the Gospels were written from the time of the Jewish revolt afterwards, because that was a phase of Christianity, and they needed to get the Gospels written to preserve the stories that they had heard. And that's all the Gospels are to me, by the way, is a record of the preservation of stories. That to me, that's what makes most sense to me. But yeah, like, it's bad. Okay, what he's doing here is very, very bad reasoning. He wants this to be the conclusion, and that is why he has ordered everything he said to this point. And it's really bad work.
This fits with other data points, pointing to their reliability and demonstrating we're not dealing with late legends.
But it's not a question of late legends. I could take your earlier dating and still get legendary development. I've said that before. Like, it's, I'm sorry, I used to pastor a Pentecostal church, and somebody getting prayed for a headache suddenly becomes, they had a tumor removed out of their brain by the power of God, and it took 2 weeks for that story to grow that far. Like, the idea that somehow, like, in the first video I reacted to live, you talked about them being biographies, and one of the things that made me laugh, like, in your video, What Are the Gospels, which is on the screen, it laughed. Well, if they're biographies, they're immune from legendary development. What? How does something being a biography mean it's immune from legendary development? How does it develop this automatic magical immunity? I'm sorry, dude. Biographies can be, in some cases, depending on the author, notorious for accepting legend as fact. Like, a good example from American history is George Washington. Like, the chopping of the cherry tree, him praying at Valley Forge. Maybe some of the rest of the stuff in that biography that said all those things was true, but they let legendary shit in. And the Gospels are no exception. You can make them biographies all you want. You can say they're written earlier all you want. It doesn't mean that the stories are true or historically accurate. None of this proves the historicity. And that's what you've been avoiding so far in all the individual videos and watching the longer one, which seems to be just you taking the small videos and doing them end to end, Mike. You still haven't proven to me how these are history. None of this proves history. Let's say I take everything you say in the Gospels are biographies. They're all actually written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, which is very, very fucking questionable. Let's say I take this video that the dating is early. It doesn't mean it's true. In order to verify something as historically true, you got to have a little more than that. You can say it's a certain genre. That doesn't prove historicity. You can say a certain person wrote it. Doesn't mean they didn't make stuff up. You can say it's written earlier, closer to the date of the actual events. Still doesn't mean legendary development didn't creep in a couple decades. Like I'm showing all the stuff on the screen. All the stuff you say is proof. None of this really proves historicity. Historicity has a very interesting criteria if you're looking at it from a classical or a lot of other different points of view. If you're going to establish the historicity of the event, like the resurrection, you have to, just because we know what the Gospels are, who wrote them, and when they wrote them, still doesn't make the contents true or immune from legendary development or immune from mythology creeping in. None of that is, you have good biographies of Alexander the Great, but there's also a bunch of mythology in those biographies. So it's like, it doesn't prove any of it. And this just frustrates me to death with Mike Jones. Mike Jones, dude, you're not a biblical scholar. You need to go learn. Okay? You need to go learn because this isn't doing it. And seeing you decided to challenge the atheist community, and I am the rabid atheist, I'm going to take on your shit video by video and show hopefully how your reasoning doesn't necessarily follow, because I could do this all day long. Like I just pull up one of your videos and I can do this all day long. It's because you reason from your conclusion and you need to stop doing it. Oh, pisses me off. So yeah, like that's another thing that could bring up on Matthew 24. It's like clear that they knew that the temple had already fallen. They already knew when he writes it. So it's like it's after the temple destruction. So it's like they're just so it just frustrates me. Mike Jones just frustrates me so much when he tries to do scholarship like this, because his methodology is always the Gospels are, he's done this throughout this whole thing. If you watch his whole 6-hour video, it's the same thing. The Gospels are Roman Greco biographies. The Gospels were written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Here, it's the Gospels are written at an early date. He starts with that conclusion and looks at anything that proves this point and ignores or strawmans everything that doesn't. The arguments for the late writing are not weak. Okay, they aren't. I mean, skeptics here is pointing them out because here's Matthew. Like, it's like the disciples point to him in the building. Can you see? You do not know it's going away. I tell you the truth. The left stone all will be thrown down. Like, even in Luke, he just copies Mark. Like, and we know it just frustrates me. There's so many other things that I could have said during this video that's proved the later dating. Like, there's just, these scholars aren't pulling this stuff out of their ass like Mike is. Like, I get conservative Christian scholarship wants to prove certain things, but it infuriates me. And so I'm going to take this down because I'm kind of done with him. I really hate it. I really hate it when people who don't have the work or the field do this kind of thing. And it's just, there's just so much more that could be said. Like the abomination of desolation, the prophets coming out of the works. Like, Mark really has this atmosphere of being written during the Jewish war, which is why it might very well be before 70 AD. But the prophetic utterance by Jesus didn't come to pass. So it's wrong. Like, I don't know. Because the language, as I recall, when you look at the Greek in here, it's like there's a past tense to it. Like that whoever wrote it already knew the temple had fallen. And that's another problem with the gospel writers too. They mess up. They get geography wrong. They get historical events wrong. Matthew screws up with the tax, the census tax when he lists off the rulers. Like there's so many screw ups in the gospels, and we just can't acknowledge them. And it makes me so sad. It does, but it also makes me angry because I can watch, like when I watch Kip Davis, I see a scholar at work, and when he uses his language, he's very, very specific, and he's that way for a reason. When I watch Digital Hammurabi or I watch, some of the other ones, they use very specific non-committal language because they're talking in probabilities of whether something's historical or a belief was real or not, because they know that it's not as clear. So it's just not that clear. Send me something. All right, hold on. Got to pull up. Hopefully my phone hasn't died. Oh, I got it. Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to share that. Can I share that? There you go. Because I'm going to save it. So this is Earl in her final form. Oh my goodness. There we go. Hold on. Here, I gotta save this as something there. Can I save this? No, I'm doing that. Oh, there it is. Okay, I got it. All right, here, let's me pull this up. This is fresh Earl art. I know y'all like to have fresh Earl art, so here we go. Yeah, the tier thing is definitely that's one of those prophecies that goes wrong. But yes, just finished it. There you go. But yeah, this is cool, Earl, because see, one of the things, like I have like collections of Earl's art, and this brings me back up because Mike Jones is pissing me off. Stay in your lane. I really wish Mike Jones would just stay in his lane, but this is beautiful because it shows to me how much you progressed as an artist, because your shadows, your shading, all of that stuff has just improved so much since I first knew you. And this is beautiful, beautiful work. But yeah, like this is a far cry from what you used to give me a year and a half ago. I have pictures. But this is so good. It's so good. Well, yeah, that's kind of it for me and Mike Jones tonight. I do need to get something to eat, but yeah, like it's if I put a final punctuation on the whole thing, my problem with Mike Jones when he talks about biblical stuff is, like all apologists, he's reasoning from the conclusion, and because he's doing that, he ends up gravitating toward anybody that supports his conclusion and ignoring or straw manning people that don't. I can tell you this, that he does not in this video deal with the real proof, evidence, criticism that puts the gospels to a later dating. He never really deals with it. He kind of sort of deals with some of it, but he always straw mans it down. He weakens it down, and he should really do a better job steel manning. So yeah, I thought so too. Some really good stuff. Earl's does great work. She does great work. But yeah, so I don't know. I'm going to be dealing with Mike Jones and going through that series and producing videos on it. And the reason I'm doing it is so many people follow this guy. If he was just some side YouTuber somewhere, I wouldn't give a damn. but the man has, I can't remember. Hold on. I want to get this right. I don't want to be inaccurately representing IP, but so inspired philosophy has 550K subscribers, over half a million. Over half a million people subscribe to his channel. His videos regularly get double-digit K views. And what is really sad is he does not deserve it. He absolutely doesn't deserve it. So I should learn better marketing. Yeah, I suppose that's true. Earl. I've said it before. Atheism is hard to market. Like it really is. Here's what I got for you. No afterlife that actually gives you peace if you really think about it and makes your life have a more fulfilling purpose because you realize it's the only one you got. And the other thing is intellectual honesty. The rest of it, I can't give you shit. I have no plastic bananas to sell you. I don't have anything to sell you because atheism really isn't something to sell. It's just kind of the default. But yeah, like I get what you're saying. But yeah, not a problem, Earl. Not a problem. I'm gonna leave this up for a bit. So I don't know. The reason I decided to take this on is because like Jones is out there saying nobody will take this on because it's such data point after data point after data point. As we've seen tonight, it's opinion and speculation after opinion and speculation without honest consideration of the other side or different sides. So that's kind of why I decided, okay, let's take this guy on. It's also designed to give me some time because I'm earnestly engaged, at least in the start of a project of starting to research the other gospels that are not canonical. One of the things that got me going on that was his original claim that the genre of the gospels is biographies. And it's like, if I consider all the other gospels, is that true? Is that true? Because some of the other gospels are just teachings of Christ, and some of it has very little narrative, and some of it only has a few stories that don't seem to be completely biographical, if you understand what I'm saying. And I was always taught when I was in Bible college that the gospels were unique literature, that it had its own genre. And he seems to indicate there's a pushback against that. And I'm like, if I can level one other criticism against that video of chapter 1, it's like, how did you prove that compared to the other gospels? Like, you haven't considered the whole genre of literature. So it's kind of what I'm doing. So, and who knows? There might be a couple academic papers and all that. Who knows? But lovely work, Earl. Appreciate you very, very much. So, I mean, it's good stuff. There's a lot of good imagery in that one. And I've noticed something else about your art. You're very focused on what you want to symbolize. And I think that's very, very good. But definitely taking from your own stuff and things too. I kind of like that. So really good. All right. I'm going to call it a night. I think we beat up Mike Jones enough. Not that it was hard. So there we go. But thanks everybody for being here. I want to give a special shout out to Coffee College, to Cranky several times. Cranky Elder Gods, appreciate you. Wolf, Julian, thank you. Martin, thank you. Evan, thank you as well. We do have new lore that Fangs likes to ride the turtle Oscar. Oscar is his steed, so I think that's cool. That's good lore. Cranky tried to trick me again, but the lore is that the master of the Fluffle always avoids the Cranky Elder's God's deceptions. So there we go. I'll make that official lore too. All right. So, as always, folks, may Fangs nibble on all of your hearts. I got to find the right stuff because when I flipped out, I lost all the stuff I already had queued up. So if you need warm fuzzies in your religion, all you have to do. Here's the other part, other great piece by the wonderful, lovely I Killed Earl. If you need warm fuzzies in your life, all you need is a picture of the godlet Fangs. He will give you all the warm fuzzies that you ever knows. His messages, yes. There you go. There you go. There we go. But if you need warm fuzzies, all you need is a picture of the godlet Fangs. He will always give you the warm fuzzies you'll ever need from any religion. Just look at him. He's so cute. He's just so cute. If you need some sort of religious ritual, all you have to do is circumcise a carrot, put it on your stash or anything else you find valuable, and it will protect your stash / valuable items, maybe. Results vary depending on anything. So it always depends. So there you go. There you go. All religious rituals have that quality. So we're right in good line with everybody else. Don't believe the vibes and lies of the apologists. Watch out for the pre-suppers. They're always out there. And always remember also that Fangs has other ways of stealing your stash that are illegal. So check your local laws. Check your local laws at all times. Thanks everybody for stopping by. I appreciate all of you. As always, live your best life. You only get one go around and then it's over. So you want to take all your time, money, and opportunities and give them to yourself, the people you love and care for, and to make this a better world. You'll be happier if you do. And don't waste them on the trappings of religion and faith, because that's a dead end. I speak from experience. And thanks everybody for being here tonight. I really appreciate it. I will see all of you on Monday with another fireside chat, and we will see whatever things I come up with this weekend to talk about. There's actually a couple of good ones. Somebody we brought up the idea of AI being used in evangelism. I find that topic to be very diabolical and interesting. But yes, please hop and hit the like button, do all the things, help promote this channel, keep it going on the path that it needs to go on. Appreciate you. All right, so thanks for stopping by, guys. I'll catch you all next time. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end to find out how you can support the channel better. Of course, there's always the normal notions of just hitting that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit your notification bell, and share the video with your friends and family that you think would be interested. That's always very appreciated. If you want to support the channel in a more tangible way, there's several options. You can super chat or super thanks in the comments or during a stream. Those are always very welcome. But you also can become a member of the channel. Members have certain perks like getting the videos early, things like that. They also have some good custom emojis during chat. So all of these things are good benefits to members, but they also support this channel and its work to continue to normalize atheism and deconversion, for which I'm very appreciative. It keeps me going, and it keeps me as a content creator being able to do more and more as a content creator. So if you choose those methods of support, thank you very much. And I appreciate you once again for staying to the end and listening to other ways that you can support the channel. Appreciate it. Thanks, and I'll catch you next time.